This time, also ask the member for Savannah if you would lead us in prayer.
Let's bow our heads. All-powerful, most wonderful Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we gather one more time, hopefully the final day of Finance Committee, as we prepare the budget for the future of these islands for the next 2 years. We ask for your guidance, your protection. Bless our families, keep them healthy, keep them safe. Bless these islands, and may we go forward under your guidance. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Please be seated. Member from Savannah had asked for permission to make a brief statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity. Last night I had a restless night, and I know that the minister that I would like to hear, my plea this morning is not here, the Minister of Education at this time, but I just want to share it with my colleagues. As I listened to the honorable member from Northside, and he and I have not talked, begging and pleading for some extra space for his school children in Northside. We know that Northside School is one of the smallest in the islands. And then as we wound up yesterday, we appropriated $22 million for the dump, and I greatly support the requests for the addition of Superior Auto for their project. I would ask that this Honorable Assembly consider, because it's going to be 2 years before they have that opportunity to expand on that school up there, and I did go and look at the computer room, and if you see it, you literally have to turn sideways to get into it. And I leave into your hands, Honorable Minister, that at some time during the day before we finalize Finance Committee, that we take a serious look at this. These are the children, these are young children. This is the primary school level. It leaves an impact on their minds. And I really appreciate you for giving me those few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to thank the member for Savannah for his support.
Okay. Members, when we concluded last night, I indicated that we would start this morning with the two votes that are outstanding with respect to off-reg. I'm going to delay that until the Premier is here. So I'm going to begin our proceedings this morning by examining the remaining votes for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. And since I am sitting in the chair this morning, as I always do, I'm going to ask that the questions be directed then to my Chief Officer, the Financial Secretary, and he will coordinate all the responses to the questions as they come. And so I'm going to begin. There are 4 items left for us to consider. The first item being FED1, Policy Advice and Ministerial Services, $2,203,050 in 2020, and $2,236,943 in 2021. Are there any questions? Member for West Bay North.
Mr. Chairman, what is the policy of your ministry on authorities creating expenditure by raising salaries, doing salary advance willy-nilly without any job evaluations and so forth? Because am I right in assuming that the authorities, the profit comes back to your central government? Is that correct? Or supposed to?
Good morning, honorable members. Kenneth Jefferson, Financial Secretary and Chief Officer in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Mr. Chairman, the Public Management and Finance Law does require essentially the excess profits, if you like, to return to government. And there is a formula that has been established, for example, to calculate the payover of dividends to central government at the end of a financial year. However, the Cabinet has the overriding ability to waive the requirements to pay over excess cash to the government, and it has the ability to waive the dividend payover.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair. We sat here and we went through of the port fiasco. Now, my investigation crew, similar to the EIU, you have the acting port director giving an individual $1,000 raise without doing a proper valuation, signaling out 2 or 3 other people without proper job evaluations not done, and these people are getting pay raises. Does this, it's supposed to, any job, any pay raise and those things, shouldn't there be some kind of evaluation and things done with this? Not just calling staff and sending out emails, do this, do that, and give this person a pay raise without an evaluation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, obviously what the Honourable Member has said accords with common sense and good governance, and there can't be any violent objections to what he has just said. From the Ministry of Finance perspective, you know, and I think pretty much central government as a whole, we would look to the individual authority to do things properly, and to have the evaluations done and to not do as the member has said has actually taken place. I think honourable members have also heard that there is an exercise that has started where the salaries in central government are being compared to those in statutory authorities, and there's meant to be, you know, a combination of the two where they become fairly equal as much as possible. Government as a whole would obviously look, I believe, to their representative on the particular statutory authority board to provide feedback as to what's happening in the individual authority, and should question things that they believe are not done properly, and question it there and then at that particular board meeting when they become aware of it. If nothing is done, I think they would bring the information. They should bring the information back to their individual ministry portfolio to let the minister or official member of cabinet know what's going on in that individual authority.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to get it clear, because I'm thinking these type of things doing this way will, in the end, not make the proper monies come back to the central authority, because we have people out there wanting for food, wanting for housing. All this adds up at the end of the day. But thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr.
Member from Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I know we don't spend a lot of time in Finance Committee talking about the revenue side of this budget. And in my desperation and plea to try and find 350,000 or thereabouts to fund the 2 classrooms that are so desperately needed in the Aidan Mile Primary School, I took the time this morning to review some of your revenue projections. And you know that the Auditor General did a report on government's revenue sometime earlier this year, late last year. and also included in the review of customs. It was a strong recommendation that we should not be heaping praise on customs every year because they exceed the revenue projections. If that happens consistently by the amounts that they do, there seems to be something wrong with their revenue projections. And here we have, I'll just give you some of the examples here. We have, and I fully understand that these revenue projections come from the department and the ministries to your ministry. You don't calculate the revenue projections. But if we look at alcohol beverages, in 2019, we had actual 22,296,000 in revenue. But in 2020, we are suddenly projecting only 21,137,000, more than $1 million less. If we look at the next line, annual permanent residence work permit fee, we got 13.798 million in 2019 actual, but the projection is 13.588 million. If we look at court fees, the actual for 2019 forecast now is 1.8 million. The revenue projected for 2020 is 1.4 million. Firearms license, we have 69 actuals in 2019, and we only projecting 1. I hope they can renew my firearm license in 2020, right? So I'm comforted, Mr. Chairman, in saying that I believe there is enough revenue under projections in this budget that would fund my classroom. Because here's what happened when we do this. People are being denied services based on your compiling of the total revenue and the total expenditures, and we're saying that you want to maintain your 90-day forecast, which I support all of that and all of the other financial regulations that we need to meet. But all of those are being met with these substantial under projections and revenue. I really don't believe that people in Cayman Islands are going to drink less alcohol in 2021 than they drank in 2020. Right? Huh? Right? And when we get to work permit fees, the Department of Homeland Security is estimating an increase up to 10,000 in work permit fees, yet the fees are down. So I just want to make my plea to the government that I think there is enough room in the under calculation of revenue that can more than adequately pay for the 2 classrooms for Aid a Mile. So I would just like to ask them to reconsider that when they get an opportunity in support of what they are. And I mean, I can go on. I mean, things like other stamp duty, which we know is not likely to go down. We got 14 million in 2019. Projection for 2020 is only 10 million. You know, so there's. I mean, I could go through. I just went through a couple of pages, and I think there's lots of. And you know that I have always been advocating that in Finance Committee, we should pay attention to the revenue side of the budget and give that some scrutiny to support your budget, as we do in the expenditure side. So I just want to ask the financial secretary if he agrees with me that there are some under projections of revenue based on what was submitted to them and based on what was actually projected for 2019-2018.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all honourable members. Certainly the points that the honourable member from Northside are making are factual. They're here in black and white, and it's difficult to counteract that because these are the projections, the revenue projections that the Ministry of Finance has compiled based on submissions received. Mr. Chairman, I can just make some general points to say that ultimately what is needed in order to give the honourable member his desire, a change in the revenue estimates themselves is not going to accomplish that. What we obviously need is a change in expenditures, and we need the expenditures to increase in order to accommodate his wish. There are a couple of ways, obviously, Mr. Chairman, that can be done. We can, the government, the Finance Committee, and the Legislative Assembly can pass the 2020 and 2021 budget as it presently stands. And as you get into 2020, there are a couple of avenues then that open up as to how expenditures can be increased. One is very well known to all honourable members. Section 11, subsection 5 of the PMFL law enables the cabinet to make certain changes up to a monetary limit, certain changes to the budget that has been approved here in the Legislative Assembly. So that's one avenue. Cabinet could actually change the existing budget even if it's passed in its present set of numbers here now. So that's one avenue. Cabinet could do so. Most of the expenditure budgets that are before us, virtually all that would take care of this situation, have been approved already by the committee. So the other avenue would be procedurally a bit more messy, in that you would have to recommit an existing budget that has already been approved to increase it. Another more, I guess, bureaucratic way to do it as well would be for an honourable minister of government to give an undertaking that they would do their level best to accommodate the request that the honourable member for Northside has raised. So ultimately, Mr. Chairman, yes, the revenue estimates can change, but what is needed is a shift in the expenditure.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I agree entirely with the FS. It is just that the argument that was given to me yesterday and last night was that even though we're spending $42 million on educational facilities, there was not room in that, or the $5 million that the member from Bordentown West was questioning, which they couldn't explain the totality thereof. They could only get to like $3 million. What I was told was that they could not accept my request to increase the expenditure because the revenue was not there. Government didn't have the money. What I'm trying to demonstrate today, that I am comfortable in saying that I believe there are areas where the revenue is underestimated, which would more than adequately cover the increase in expenditure that I'm looking for. I fully agree, and I can't move a motion to increase expenditure, neither can I move a motion to increase revenue. But what I'm trying to do is to give the cabinet and the government the opportunity to provide these needed classrooms for Northside based on the argument that revenue is going to be greater than what is projected.
Deputy Premier.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, let me just weigh in. The minister is not here. I believe she'll be here shortly. But everyone in this House knows her commitment to education. Last night when she explained that there are a lot of things that she would like to do, but she couldn't get the funding for it, I think the members made some very good points this morning. And he well knows from where he sat in the past that as you look at the budget during the year and you see surpluses coming out and priorities, I believe that last night she made it very clear that a priority of hers would be to continue to improve education and a good dialogue with the member. So I think that it's been very valuable what he's done this morning, pointing out the areas that a improvement of revenue should be evident in the first couple of months. And I'm certainly not speaking for her, but I think everybody here knows that she wants the best for every different district. And with the absence this morning, I would suggest that we wait until she comes in, and they could probably have a sidebar and get some comfort from it.
Mr. Chairman,
Member for
I would like,
Savannah.
as usual, to thank the deputy leader. He always has the timely intervention, understanding, especially the emotional side that goes with the people over here and the entire Parliament. I always admire what he does, and I've known him in the past, along with you and others, of my colleagues on that side. And just to draw back memory, was 2 or 3 years ago when a very similar situation, when Minister at that time, Panton, was able to find some money in his environmental vote. And you know, this is what it's all about. It's about the children, above all else. And thank you, Minister for Tourism.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really want to echo the sentiments of my colleague from Savannah. I must admit I found both yourself and the Minister of Tourism very professional and forthright in this entire process thus far. Yeah. And I want to start off too, Mr. Chairman, by thanking your team and even your good self for the manner in which you have conducted these this budget process. It has not gone unnoticed. You have been very professional and I might say to some extent impartial in many of your rulings. So I must say that you have been doing a good job. Just expanding on the issue that was raised by my colleague from Northside with regards to government budgeting. One of the things I'm looking at, and this is something that we had discussed because it came up in Public Accounts Committee when we were looking at the Auditor General's report with regards to customs in the Cayman Islands, and we looked at the custom performance in terms of budget versus actual. While we understand that the budget itself is just really taken at a point based on assumptions used, we couldn't help but notice, and just looking at the government overall numbers, if you look at your 2018 budget that was presented, we had forecasted 731 million in revenues. The actual is 828, which is 107 million more, or 15%. You look at 2019, the budget that we approved 2 years ago, I'd said we're looking at revenues of 723 million, and we end up doing 824 million. So for both 2018 and 2019, the budget surplus, or in terms of revenue, is in excess of over $100 million each year, which is roughly around 14%. So I preamble all of that to ask Mr. Chairman, in terms of putting together the budget, and we do understand that when you're looking at macroeconomic policies and there are many moving parts, what we're trying to understand or would like to understand is what assumptions or what metrics generally is inputted into the budget to have the outcome in terms of where we expect the revenues to be. Because now, as you can see, even with the budget that we have now for 2020, it is even less than the revenues for 2018. So we're a little bit curious in terms of with a growing population, and as the government points out at every opportunity, and a booming economy, we're trying to figure out how the revenues for 2018 can even be more than the revenues for 2020. So with that said, I'd just like to understand the assumptions or the mindset that goes into producing this number. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the honourable member for Bodden Town West for that, obviously astute set of observations. And it is indeed correct, Mr. Chairman and members, that the 2020 and 2021 revenue estimates are in fact very conservative when you compare it with the 18 and the 19, the 18 actual numbers of 838 million. And the forecast for 2019 is for 824 million, and the 2020 revenue forecast, Mr. Chairman, is virtually flat at 825 million. So 2020 is being forecasted virtually identical to where we believe that 2019 will end. Mr. Chairman, in terms of the factors that are taken into consideration, in very general terms, the one that we look at to start with is our estimate of GDP, gross domestic product, and it's an estimate obviously that comes from the Economics and Statistics Office. So that's where we begin, and we would try to certainly maintain or contain our revenue estimates so as to not to exceed that amount. Having said that, though, Mr. Chairman, there will be specific knowledge known to the distinct sectors of our economy that are different to a set of knowledge that are different to what the GDP number is forecasting. So, as an example, CEMA, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, may know something specific to the financial services sector, and so their estimate for that sector might be slightly different from the overall GDP number. Similarly, Companies Registry, for example, may know something unique that's going to happen in the coming 2 years that is not necessarily captured by the GDP number. Mr. Chairman, I think those are some of the two areas that that most affect our revenue estimates, the overall GDP number, but I think more importantly, it would be the individual sectors giving hopefully better, precise estimates than you get from a general GDP number.
Thank you very much, Financial Secretary, for that response. Like the member for Northside, I mean, I too am concerned with regards to the revenue forecast because it does impact some of the assumptions that the government made, and I think it's important for us to at least, from that standpoint, get that number, I guess, as close as possible. We recognize it's impossible, and that things can change, but at the end of the day, it does impact government's overall ability in terms of once you know what the top number is, it drives the different expenses. And with $100 million more, we could have been able to at least barely be comfortable, even if we did 10% more of that, which is around 10 million. That could go much further within the local economy in terms of helping many of our people. So I really want to thank you for that. And I know the Honorable Leader, I have a series of questions, but I will cede for now so others can get an opportunity. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
I do have the Leader of the Opposition indicating to me. Well, and I come to you.
Mr. Chairman. Sorry. Mr. Chairman, sorry. I was just conferring with a colleague. I'll be very brief and to say to honourable members that we fully accept the point made about the revenue estimates and the need for it, and it's fully understood that if your revenue number is too little and than it should be, then that drives the expenditure total. And I think what the honourable members of the opposition are saying is that if the revenue estimate were higher, that would allow more expenditure to be incurred and therefore to address the needs in the society better. I would very quickly add to say, Mr. Chairman, that obviously for the benefit of the listening public, the government has to arrange its finances in accordance with the Public Management and Finance Law. And there are certain principles specified in the law which the government must satisfy. One of those is that it has to have an operating surplus. And even more importantly than the surplus itself is the question as to how that surplus is going to be used. In government, Mr. Chairman and honourable members will know, the government has a strong desire, and it's actually demonstrated it in practice. It wishes to minimize the debt, its borrowings, as much as possible. So you have to have a surplus. How you apply that surplus is even more important. We use that surplus to pay our principal debt repayments. We also use that surplus to fund our capital program. And if there's anything left at the end of all of that, it actually then grows the cash balance going into the following year. So I just wanted to say that, Mr. Chairman, for the benefit of the listening public, that the need for a surplus is more important than just, it is practically more important than just satisfying a rule in the Public Management and Finance Law. It has great significance if the government wants to minimize its borrowings and repay debt and so forth, Mr. Chairman.
Member for East End.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. And despite my ribbon of you and the Deputy Premier, I have a lot of time for both of you also.
Thank you, sir. Questions from you?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Central Procurement Office is under your ministry, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. How much do they weigh in on major projects? In particular, I'm asking about the ISWIMs, they call it? ISWIMs or win, I don't know if it could be win or win, or loss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ISWIMS, for the benefit of the listening public, stands for Integrated Solid Waste Management System. We spoke about in committee yesterday that particular project. Mr. Chairman, the Central Procurement Office at present consists of 2 persons, the Director of the Procurement Office and the Deputy Director. There are plans to increase that very slightly in the future. Mr. Chairman, a project of the magnitude of ISWIMS would get scrutiny by what is termed in the procurement law a public procurement committee, and that committee looks at capital projects that are in excess of $250,000. So that's a fairly low threshold in terms of a capital program. So a project generally would come to the Public Procurement Committee, which is a committee of persons outside of government, persons appointed from the private sector, to look and scrutinize at projects. The Central Procurement Office, the director, sits in on those meetings for the procurement committee, the Public Procurement Committee. In terms of, I think your question was more specifically not on the committee, but on the procurement office itself. Certainly, Mr. Chairman, the procurement office, if requested, would, for any project, would do its level best to provide help and information needed to get the best possible value for money for that particular project. And I don't know the specifics of the procurement office in terms of its involvement with ISWIMS. I'm speaking generally, and that is the situation, that the procurement office will provide information to ensure that not only is the procurement law followed, to the T, but also to provide practical, useful information, always geared at the ultimate goal of value for money.
I'm glad you said that at the end, because that is one of the remits of the procurement office, Central Procurement Office, isn't it? To advise on chief officers.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And you're saying it's only when asked?
Mr. Chairman, certainly if the procurement office is aware of projects going on, it can also obviously reach out as well. So it's not a one-way street. So
okay.
I can refine my earlier statement.
Okay. Can you then tell this committee if they have been involved in that, in advising, since that's publicly known, and the office would be privy to that is ongoing? Have they been advising on the in particular, the remediation that is the big subject matter now.
Mr. Chairman, just give me a second, sir. Mr. Chairman, I always found that over the last 2 weeks, it's perhaps best not to attempt to relay information. I have the director of the Central Procurement Office with me, Mr. Tariq Bashir, and with your permission, I would ask that Mr. Bashir be allowed to speak directly to the question asked by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chairman, FS, thank you. Tariq Bashir, I'm the Director of the Central Procurement Office in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. I think the FS has answered the question around generally how the Central Procurement Office provides support and guidance. We have a very small team at the moment, as the FS says. We have a budget of 4 people, and we currently have 2 people in post, myself and one other person. Just going to your specific question with regard to the ISWIMS project. The ISWIMS project was actually approved by the Central Tenders Committee. And the Central Tenders Committee, the current procurement law and regulations, replaced the Central Tenders Committee by the Public Procurement Committee, as the Financial Secretary has said. So projects that started and commenced before the Public Procurement Committee came into effect are discussed by the Central Tenders Committee. So the Central Tenders Committee has been reformed. It consists of the same members as are on the Public Procurement Committee. And as far as the ISWIMS project is concerned, in the specific question, following the approval of this project, which I'm not sure exactly when it was a few years ago, one of the stipulations within that approval of that project by the Central Tenders Committee was that the project team would provide updates to the Central Tenders Committee. And in fact, one such update was provided at the last Public Procurement Committee to the Central Tenders Committee. So the approval for the project and for the specific aspects of that project have already been completed by the Central Tenders Committee a number of years ago, and the only stipulation requirement at the moment is that those updates are provided, and that was done. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. So they have approved the whole bidding process?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the procurement process for this project has been completed and approved. My understanding, as the FS says, the project team are involved, and I believe that's been discussed by this Honourable House during the last few days, and they have a duty to provide updates to the CTC, which they've done. And those updates did cover the work that's currently being proposed and done by that project team.
But sir, I say it to stop you. But, Mr. Chairman and FS, please help me, because I'm missing something or I'm confusing things. I'm twisting them up. We approved the monies to get a job done just yesterday. This House. The Central Tenders Committee. Do we know how much the project has costed? The entire project? Do we know what that is? Because I don't know. I don't know if anybody else in here. Do we know the cost of this integrated solid waste? No?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask Mr. Bashir to provide, to hit the best of his knowledge, an approximate amount. I mean, obviously, Mr. Chairman.
Did not be
this-
better to bring the Central Tenders Committee?
Sorry, sir? I didn't hear that last comment.
Would it not be better to bring the Central Tenders Committee, since they fall under you as well?
Mr. Chairman, the question, the request from the honourable member was for an approximate value of the ISRIM project.
No. No. I'm sorry you got it mixed up. Maybe I said it wrong.
Yes, you did.
This gentleman said that this project was approved by the Central Tenders Committee a long time ago. As far as I know, Central Tenders Committee gets involved once to evaluate value for money. So that's what I'm asking for. What was the cost that the Central Tenders Committee approved?
Mr. Chairman?
Not no approximate.
Mr. Chairman, through you, that question will be better directed to the project management team, who have all the detail of the cost structure. Just to clarify, the Central Tenders Committee and the current Public Procurement Committee approved the procurement process. So their job is to ensure that that procurement process is being followed according to the laws and the regulations of our land, and they don't necessarily approve the final expenditure. So from my understanding, Mr. Chairman, in this Honourable House, those discussions have been happening, and there is a project team currently in contract negotiations finalising all those details.
The Central did I hear you right? Just correct me if I'm wrong. The Central Tenders Committee approved the procurement process, or was it the procurement committee that did that?
Mr. Chairman, through you, it was the Central Tenders Committee, and their role, as is the role of the current Public Procurement Committee, which is set out in the law, procurement laws and regulations, is to approve that process and allow the project team to proceed with negotiations with the preferred bidder. And to my knowledge, that's what's happening at the moment. The Central Tenders Committee also requested that as those negotiations proceed, that the project team come back to the Central Tenders Committee to provide updates on progress. And that's just recently happened.
Mr. Chairman, and you and your chief officer may know better than me. Can we see the criteria, the rules, the process under which the Central Tenders Committee work? Because I've never heard of them approving the procurement process. Now the procurement board, the new under the procurement law, that one needs to do it, is mandated to do that. But I've never heard the Central Tenders Committee doing that. Can I see where that is written? And you know how this came about? I was merely asking if the office had been weighing in on these major projects and given advice. Obviously, in this case, the office has not, your office has not been, because the impression I'm getting is that it had already been done by Central Tenders Committee, and therefore there was no need for the procurement office to weigh in. That's the impression I'm getting. Maybe I'm wrong.
Mr. Chairman, through you, and I think as the Financial Secretary said earlier on, we do provide a lot of advice, we do provide a lot of guidance, we have a lot of tools on our website to support all the ministries, to support actually all of the public sector on the Cayman Islands, to help them to achieve the objectives that we've already discussed around good outcomes from the procurement process. From my particular point of view, I've been in post now for 16 months. The Office of the Central Procurement Office was established following an audit report about 3 years before I arrived. Because this is before my time, I'm unsure as to when that approval for the Central Tenders Committee took place, but it was certainly before my time. But I would expect that at that time, if the Central Procurement Office was in existence, they would have provided advice and guidance through the procurement process at that time, as I do at the moment in any major capital projects, and in fact in any procurements that come to me when that support is requested. That support from the Central Procurement Office isn't just provided by people coming to see me face to face. We deliver a lot of training. We're delivering a lot of training on our electronic procurement portal. We're delivering a lot of training at the moment in how tender documents are put together, in how evaluations are carried out. And we have a lot of tools and templates on our website that people can follow. So there's a number of ways that we're providing guidance and support. At the end of all that, if a chief officer or a project manager would like to approach us directly regarding a procurement, we give face-to-face advice. Mr. Chairman, I hope that answers the question to some degree.
Thank you for all that, but I mean, that's good information, but I really wasn't needing all that, but that's fine. At least I now know. Part of your responsibility is advising chief officers on the procurement of major projects. So going right back to where I started, maybe I didn't get it out right. So when I asked the question as to whether or not your office weighed in on this particular project, I was told that it can be initiated by the chief officer or by your office. And I said that this one is very publicly known. Has that office weighed in, meaning your office, weighed in on advising on this project? Now, has your office weighed in and advised them on it, other than what you have just explained about the procurement of the Central Tenders Committee?
Mr. Chairman, through you, as I said earlier on, the project team did approach me. They talked to me about the negotiations that are ongoing. They did talk to me about how they could proceed with the current part of the project, which is the capping of the waste dump. And I looked at the information that they've provided, and based on the fact that the procurement process had already been approved, and I'm not in a position to go back and re-unapprove that process, my advice to them was that the decision from the Central Tenders Committee was that the Central Tenders Committee should be provided regular updates and the detail of how those negotiations were progressing. And that project team did do that in the last minute, and they had some guidance and approval to proceed from a procurement point of view with the next step of their project. This is, as I said earlier on, Mr. Chairman, this is all about the procurement process. It's not about approving the budget or approving the money. That is done by this Honourable House. So from my point of view, in answer to the Honourable Member's question, some advice was requested, and I gave advice appropriate to what I felt was the correct way forward for that project team, which was to present an update to the Central Tenders Committee.
So did you give any advice to the chief officer? Or was any on your own initiative or being asked?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the advice that was requested from me was from the project manager. I've not been approached specifically by the chief officer. He provided me, and I requested, and also looked at some of the documentation, the approval documentation from the Central Tenders Committee, and my advice was based on that information that he provided me. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, if the chief officer approaches me and requests for some support and advice, or if I think based on the information that was provided to me by the project manager, and we also discussed the project in some detail with the Central Tenders Committee. Obviously, based on any of those things, if I felt that I had some concerns related to the procurement process, I would raise those with the chief officer, or I would raise them with appropriate authorities.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to pursue this anymore because the jury is still out on whether the Central Tenders Committee, the overlap of the Central Tenders Committee and the Procurement Office is of such that we are conflating the two. The jury is still out on that one. But certainly it appears like everybody's circumventing everybody else on this project, because the project office should not have gone to the Central Procurement Office. That's not their place. It's their place to go to the Procurement Office. The Central Procurement Office advises civil servants, those who are in charge of the projects, and that is chief officers. The chief officer has been left out of this loop.
Mr. Chair,
Member, go ahead.
that is an incorrect statement that the member just made. The chief officer is a part of the team that works with the major projects office. They're in constant contact. Nothing happens without the chief officer's approval.
Well, Mr. Chairman, then the minister has to explain how the project office is going directly to the Central Procurement Office. And there was no indication that the Central Procurement Office was advising the chief officer, which is within the remit of the Central Procurement Office. That's where it must come from. That's not what the gentleman just explained. Oh, I see. Well, don't put it in here then.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Bashir can make some more comments, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I can talk generally around how the Central Procurement Office works and how we provide advice and guidance. So some of that I've already covered through training, through tools, through templates, through our website. We're a very small team, and I feel that we would like to obviously deliver services more than the size of our team. And what we're trying to do, the whole concept and principle, is around self-help through training and advice and guidance, building the capability and capacity of the whole of the public sector on the Cayman Islands in terms of the skills and capability in procurement and delivering procurement projects. So to this end, all of that is done, but at the same time, anybody can approach us for advice and for guidance. And a project team or a project manager or anybody that's running a procurement can approach us at any time. It doesn't, we don't say that for every project we will talk to every chief officer. We could never be able to do this. So we would expect the chief officers to be able to run their businesses appropriately and to take feedback, guidance, updates from all the people that are employed in that ministry. And if I feel that there's some issues, I can take the initiative to contact a chief officer. And chief officers do contact me if they feel that they have a concern or they require some specific advice that is specific to them, not necessarily to the project manager. If we look at the numbers, Mr. Chairman, we have 300 projects this year gone through Bonfire, our electronic procurement portal. So for every one of those 300 projects, there is no expectation that I have to touch base with every one of those chief officers for every one of those projects. Just to add, from a visibility point of view, every project above $100,000 is duty-bound by our laws and regulations to be published publicly, and they have to go through an electronic procurement portal that we've implemented called Bonfire. And if I have any issues or concerns, or if I need to do any investigations, I have visibility of every one of those projects, as does my team.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to read two of the requirements of this office. Developing and implementing a code of conduct in consultation with the chief officer for the Ministry of Finance for suppliers, procuring entities, and all public officers engaged in procurement activities at all stages. Such code specifying standards of conduct and procedures and best practices. Number 2, advising chief officers on the procurement of major projects. That's what this office does, amongst other things like training but public officers. So that is the basis on which I was asking those questions. And whilst the office may not be restricted to chief officers, that does not reflect in their scope of activities.
Member?
Mr. Chair, I came on and found this project is ongoing from the last government, and I wouldn't say it was a mess, but definitely there are things that needed to be reined in and to ensure that we got value for money. My responsibility was to ensure that the actual project could be carried out, because my caucus asked me to follow the process and to see if it was something that the government should continue putting their energy in. I assured the caucus and cabinet that yes, this was a project that should be continued, and that with some tweaking that we could reach our goal. Now, I don't want anyone to, because I'm the minister responsible for this, even though they're asking the question to someone else. So I'm being accused. And I don't want anyone to mislead this honorable house or the public as to my ability, however, so unassuming. So I have asked for the chief officer and the lead negotiator on this project to come down here to appease this honorable house and the member that the same questions that he's asking is being followed. No one goes to the procurement office without the chief officer's instruction. She is intimately involved with this project. She is on the team and knows every move that is going on with this project. So if we can allow the members the witnesses to get down here, they will be happy to give more information to this honorable house.
Mr. Chairman, I have to weigh in there. If for some reason what I am asking here comes across as me accusing somebody of doing something, that is not the intent. I have a responsibility to ensure that the governance of this country through the processes is proper on behalf of the people of East End in particular and the people of this country in general. Now, if I get someone hot around the collar without the intent, that is not the stated intent. I am asking questions, and when the questions are not answered, the way they should, then someone else has to clear that up. There is a process, and that process must be followed. There cannot be any circumvention of that process. There cannot be the creation of new rules to adjust to get things done. The rules must be followed.
Members, my concern is that we are just delving down into so much detail with regard to this that we are far beyond what is before the House at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, no, Mr. Chairman. You
Mr.
please, I draw your attention to page 414 of the budget statements. And there it is very clear, sir, the scope of activities for the Central Procurement Office, which falls under your remit, under your constitutional responsibility. And that is under which I am questioning, sir.
Proceed with the questioning.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Just to add some context, because if you do recognize on just about every government board and also the project office, your office is represented from a governance standpoint that falls squarely with the Minister of Finance. So I think the question is more along the lines of governance and to making sure that your ministry does what it needs to in terms of carrying out its own functions. But Mr. Chairman, I just want to touch on one question. I know others want to chime in also. But I just want to find out, have we set the census date yet or the census period for next year? I know we already voted on ESO, but I know the cost went up for next year, so I assume it's for the census. And I think that's what was included. Have we set the census date yet for next year or the time period that we'll be looking at?
He was asking the question whether the census date has been set. I know it's been set. My recollection is to be confirmed is that it is the 10th of October 2020.
No problem. Well, while you're pulling that information, Mr. Chairman, I was just curious on, and maybe the Honorable Financial Secretary can help with this response. It was just on page 337 of the planning estimates that dealt with royalties and dredge.
Sorry, Honourable Member. I
Yeah.
just wanted to just make a refinement on what was just said. Excuse me. The date of the census next year, 2020, has not been firmly established. Cabinet is to establish that date. The Economics and Statistics Office will be recommending a date to Cabinet to confirm that census date. And the recommendation at this point will be from the ESO that the census date be the 11th of November, October, 2020.
11th of October.
So it's just slightly off, sir. One day.
I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, while I think the representative for ESO is here, that is one department that have done a great job in terms of compiling a lot of information, and I really want to honestly say thanks so much for the information that you have put together. It is world class, and the amount of data we have out there is just phenomenal, and it has helped us a lot in these budget proceedings. So I just want to say that. No, I actually do speak to them on a regular basis, and they have a very professional team over there. My next question, Mr. Chairman, through you, to the Honorable Financial Secretary. I just couldn't help but notice on the revenue side that the royalties and dredging, which is on page 337, went from 645,000 in 2018 to 94,000 forecasted for 2019, and then 650,000 for 2020 and 2021. I was just curious in terms of that description, royalties and dredging, what does that cover, what does that entails?
Mr. Chairman, just give us a short moment. Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. We're going to need some short moments to actually confirm the source of that description. I do know that, obviously when private enterprise excavate material on island and not even necessarily from the seabed, there are royalties payable to the government. It may be that's what's being captured here, but we're going to seek confirmation as to exactly the source of this revenue line.
Mr. Chairman, that confirmation can come in writing. In fairness, you have a very decent professional team. They have very good standing with the opposition. They can send it at a later date. I'm not going to hold up the proceedings waiting on an answer.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to give the Financial Secretary a little time to finish his notes there. Yeah? Good morning, Financial Secretary.
Morning, sir.
And good morning to your team. I want to go through this output FDA 1 just to get a better understanding so I can go through my proper line of questioning. So I see that the total amount of this is about 4.5 million over the next 2 years, correct?
I think that information is before you, sir. Again.
Yes, sir, that's correct, sir.
Mr. Chair, I do accept that some of this may sound repetitive, but we have to recognize that there's also a population of Caymanians who don't have this book, and I'm trying to help them to understand what we're trying to do. So bear with me, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in 5 seconds, 2.2 million each year.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I just want to see if I can fully understand what this money is going to go to. I see under the description it says provision of policy, advice, and support to the Minister for Finance on matters relating to, and the two particular ones I want to focus on is economic issues and risk management. And if we look at the groups in the budget statement outputs under ESO 10 and RSK6, I want to see if I fully get the grasp of what this money is going to go to. So in respect to ESO 10, we have a little over $100,000 going to policy and technical advice on statistical matters and economic issues. And then in the description it says provision of policy and technical advice to the Financial Secretary, Cabinet, committees, and other government agencies on data collection, survey design and associated methodology, economic outlook, macroeconomic impact analysis and forecasting, research, and selected economic issues. Can you help me, Mr. Secretary, by explaining the macroeconomics impact analysis and forecasting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have the Director of the ESO Economics and Statistics Office here with me, Mr. Adolphus Laidlaw, and I'll again, rather than relay information and take up more time, I'll ask the Director to speak to the Honourable Member's question.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and FS. My name is Adolphus Laidlaw, the Director of Economics and Statistics Office under the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Thank you to the Honourable Member for the question.
Can I ask you if you'd speak closer into the microphone?
Thank you for
Thank you.
the Honourable Member for your question. One of the ESO's mandate is to have a continuous forecast. So every report we produce at least 4 macroeconomic forecasts. Meaning, in terms of inflation, we look at unemployment, we forecast GDP, and the current account of the balance of payment. One of such report would be our contribution to the SPS policy statement, and that's where I think your question pertains to. So we are required to by law, to do the economic forecast of the Cayman Islands through that report.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Good morning to you. I'm probably going to have a few more questions for you, so you might want to stick around. You say you're obligated by law to give economic forecasts to the cabinet. Was I correct in hearing that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Because I was just about actually to, through you, Mr. Chair, talk about the ESO 10, where it says the timeliness is to update economic outlook and macroeconomic forecasts to be produced within deadlines set for strategic policy statement and preparation. Does that mean you have to give advice to the cabinet on forecasts for the projections for the future? Would that be correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Through you, Mr. Chair, I want to move now to RSK 6, which has a total of just over, close to $400,000 over the 2-year period out of the $4.5 million under this output FED1, which is policy advice to ministerial services. And in the description it says, management of operational, financial, strategic, and hazardous risk involving 1, identifying, evaluating, and reviewing risk. 2, developing and managing risk awareness/reduction projects. 3, incident investigation. 4, arranging and coordinating appropriate property and liability insurance coverage. Give me a little understanding, because I want to understand what that means. Maybe I'm mixing it up with like property liability as opposed to risk analysis of our forecast.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, the honourable member's question, just for the benefit of the listening public, is pertaining to the risk management unit within the Ministry of Finance. That unit, Mr. Chairman, is primarily responsible for insurance coverage for government as a whole. Honourable members may have recalled previously they approved a Caribbean catastrophic risk insurance facility. That's one aspect, but the unit becomes involved, or gets involved with providing insurance coverage for central government, as well as statutory authorities and government companies as well would use the services of the unit to provide coverage. But I do have Mr. Michael Nixon with me, Mr. Chairman, if honourable members have more detailed questions.
I actually don't. I'm going to withdraw that area of concern, because I actually realize it's more about liability insurance, basically. So I thank you for that well done explanation. But I want to get back to the ministry and its role, because it is the minister or the ministry, I don't want to specifically target the person, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Can you give me in broad scope what that role entails?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank the honourable member for that question. One of the ways of addressing that question is to look at the underlying departments that fall within the ministry. So the Ministry of Finance consists of Economics and Statistics Office. It consists of the Postal Services. It consists of the Central Procurement Office and the Treasury Department. Are the main areas, and the Risk Management Unit are the main areas, the main components of the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Chairman, picking out one of those components, the Treasury, for example, the principal role of the Treasury would be to assist in the coordination and the production of the documents that are right here in front of us now, the biannual budgets of the government. That's its principal role. In addition to that, though, Mr. Chairman, the ministry would would produce monthly financial reports detailing the government's revenues and expenditures on a month-by-month basis as the financial year progresses. The the Treasury Department would produce that cabinet note with appendices attached with actual revenue details, specific revenue lines, and so forth. I would review it, Mr. Chairman, you would review it, and it would be taken to cabinet. And that is done monthly. So Treasury Department principally involved with budget production, providing information to the minister to take to cabinet on financial matters. The Treasury Department, an element of Treasury Department a bit more deeper, Mr. Chairman, gets involved also with trying to assist with the collection of debts that are owed to the government. So there's a debt recovery section within the Treasury Department itself. I think those are some of the key areas, the key responsibilities of the Treasury, as well as providing advice to other government agencies on financial matters. So typically, Honorable Member, if there is a cabinet paper, I'll slow down so you can make some notes. Typically, if there's a request for supplementary expenditures during the course of a year from another ministry portfolio office, the procedure is that the Cabinet Office has instructed that that paper be sent to the Minister of Finance for Finance to give an input into that Cabinet paper request. That then goes back to the Ministry Portfolio Office making the request, and it goes to Cabinet. So we provide financial input to the other ministries' needs as well. So that was the Treasury Department. I don't know if there's any questions coming out of that, or you want me to move on to...
Well, in the interest of time, through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Secretary, what I want to focus on really is the role of this ministry for forecasting our economy. Not really the accounting stuff and adding the numbers. You guys do an amazing job about that. A budget with $2 billion, you guys are doing quite well. But I want to talk about the responsibility of this ministry for forecasting, because you just talked about providing advice to government agencies and providing information to take to cabinet. And we just heard the director talk about inflation, employment, projections, and the like.
Yes.
Maybe if he's willing to come back, would it be fair to say that their role in respect to forecasting would be to, if they see any figures that may trigger concern, whether it's increase or decrease in certain areas, that based on their expertise, that would say, well, if this happens a little bit too much here, this can have a negative effect on that. Is there a responsibility of them to let the cabinet minister know, to let the rest of the cabinet know? Because we know that the minister goes back to cabinet. I'm saying, is it their job to identify risk and inform the minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We fully understand the question, Honourable Member. I'll let Mr. Laidlaw speak to, because essentially what the Honourable Member is asking for is, to a certain extent, the role that the ESO undertakes, but is not quite fully 100% their role. So ESO would certainly do the surveys necessary to come up with the overall gross domestic product number. It would do surveys to deal with labor, how the labor market is performing, unemployment is performing by virtue of surveys and reports. And honourable members would frequently see here in the LA reports being tabled, the spring labor force survey, the autumn, fall labor force survey. So at a global level, the ESO is going to get involved with GDP estimation, unemployment estimation, inflation estimation, balance of payments, etc. And it does get involved with special projects such as census taking. Honourable members will know that in the previous administration there was also quite a detailed request for how the labor markets were how the labor market was performing for individual sectors, and that was very detailed and took quite a long time. ESO got involved with that. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and let Mr. Laidlaw speak to it. But if necessary, I can come back and address. I think the other important aspect of what the member is asking for is For example, if there's a fall off, a seen fall off or decline versus budget projections for fees arising from company registration. I think that's a bit more detailed than the ESO would get involved with, and that's more for the Minister of Finance proper.
Well, Mr. Secretary, not to stop the director from giving more in-depth analysis, but I think you get down to the line of where I'm trying to get, which is who analyzes the data that we collect and then processes it and then makes it a determination and then advises this cabinet to make proper decisions on the future of this country. Because we know every country has that role for projecting the future and making the necessary moves to policy. I'm asking you, is it this ministry's role, yes or no?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I certainly want to allow an opportunity for Mr. Laidlaw to speak to the role of the ESO generally, but just to directly address the member's question, no. The Minister of Finance would have, I would describe it as that central role of addressing what you just said. Ministries and portfolios, Mr. Chairman, as you will know, sir, they have their own, if you like, books of accounts. So the Ministry of Financial Services has its own general ledger where it records its expenditures and its revenues. So does the Ministry of Health, so does the Cabinet Office and so forth. So each of the just for elaboration and education, hopefully, of the public. So each of the entities within central government have their own set of books, and they record their expenditure in their books. So, Mr. Chairman, Ministry of Financial Services, as an example, because they're a major revenue source for the government, would record revenues from collected via SEMA, revenues from the company's registry, and so forth. We see it as each individual agency, ministry portfolio, having responsibility for that particular area. The primary focus should come at that level. So if an individual ministry sees that its revenue is falling behind from projections, they should, alert their minister that things are not going quite well. Even if they fail to do that, then the Minister of Finance then has, like I say, an overall coordinating role. We then have to, on a monthly basis, put those reports, if you like, collect those reports, those individual inputs done by ministries, and obviously that's done automated, right? It's not a manual job that's done. We then have to coordinate and collate those to produce a set of financial information for the government as a whole. But in doing so, we would show the individual lines of expenditures, personnel costs, supplies and materials, depreciation. On the revenue side, it would get down as detailed as stamp duty from land transfers, custom duties imported from vehicles, etc. So, and we would then see in the Ministry of Finance, we would then see what the revenues, if you're concentrating on revenues, what the revenues are for each particular stage in the financial year versus what the budget is expected for that particular month. And there would obviously be a variance if the two are different. And we would start investigating, seeking comments from the individual minister and portfolio. Why is this a great variance on this particular revenue line? We would produce a report, the monthly reports that I spoke about earlier. We would produce a monthly report to our minister, the Minister for Finance, with comments on significant variances between budgeted revenues and what is actually being received in each month throughout the course of the year. Honorable members also know that on a quarterly basis, the government, and it falls to the Ministry of Finance, has to produce a public report. And I think the Minister for Finance is required to table those quarterly reports, the first 3 quarters of our financial year. He has to table those quarterly reports in the House, in the Legislative Assembly, given the type of information that I've just stated. I hope that's helpful, sir.
That is definitely helping me, because I think you said that within those reports back to yourself and your team, then the report is questions are asked about any variances, a lot more or a lot less, because that's where we take the analysis as to the market, right, based on those numbers. A report is then given to the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Finance offers a quarterly report. Now, in that...
And monthly as well, Mr. Chair.
And monthly, thank you so much. Through you, Mr. Chair. In that monthly report, is there, because I'm trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of who's analyzing the data. Is there an analysis within these reports that present to the Cabinet a fair or a positive that can potentially happen? Because we're going to get some harder questions shortly.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. That role, that function that the honourable member, just through you, sir, just spoke about, would primarily fall to the Minister of Finance, because we are the ones that coordinate the report. But in doing so, staff in the Ministry of Finance would reach out to staff in other ministries and portfolios who have responsibility and have better knowledge for that particular revenue source, and would ask them, why do you think that there's a significant variance between your actual revenues and your budgeted revenues? So if we were dealing with stamp duty on land transfers, for example, and we saw that the revenue in June of any particular year was 25% higher than the budget had expected it to be. We in finance, we have a section in our report that speaks to positive variances and negative variances from the budgets and reasons for the variances taking place. So back to my example, if we were speaking about stamp duty and it was 25% higher, or it could have been 25% lower, we would reach out to Lands and Survey, for example, department, and say, we've noticed this variance. Do you have any significant factors to explain why it's so much better or so much worse than the budget is expecting? And that particular example, I know that, for example, has been exceeding the budget expectations for quite some time and by quite significant amounts.
What do you do with that information once you realize that?
Well, we record that in the report in words to the minister, saying, the revenue, for example, on stamp duty transfers is 25% better than budget. However, it is because there are significant one-off transactions which are not necessarily going to recur again. So, in other words, in common everyday language,
it could just be a special event.
Don't count on this to happen.
To continue to happen.
Over and over and over. So we pointed to examples of, for example, sale of writs, sale of the Royal Palms, and so forth. So there's a section in the report that details positive variances and the reasons for them. And here's a next section that deals with revenue fall off, and the same thing on expenditures. The personnel costs are running behind budget, but ministers and portfolios are saying that they do intend to hire more staff in the last 6 months of the year, and therefore the variance that you see now may not be the variance that you see in November. So both the positive and the negatives and reasons for.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I don't want to drag this out much longer. I want to get more to the types of things I'm asking about. So, say for instance, we've seen there's a major increase in importation of cars. We've also seen there's a major increase in licensing of cars. We've also seen there's a major increase in work permits of persons here. That kind of information and data, is that analyzed, and who analyzes it, and who then transfers that analysis to the Cabinet?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps it's a bit uncanny, but the examples that the Honorable Member has just cited, as you know, sir, frequently appear in the reports that are sent to the minister that go on to cabinet. So we would make the Ministry of Finance would make the observation that import duty arising from vehicles coming into the country are running ahead of budget expectations by X million dollars. And the reasons for it are because simply there's a lot more cars being imported into the islands. That's the type of narrative that we would get. So we would look, for example, at import duty on gasoline and diesel, and that is like the two of them obviously are strongly correlated, and we would expect that to show an increase as well. And typically they do. So to answer your question, it would be the Ministry of Finance that would analyze the results, if necessary, reach out to an underlying department, gather reasons for it, record those reasons in the document that goes to the minister, and he takes it to cabinet.
So you're saying that it's the minister's responsibility to then analyze that information and give it to the cabinet as to the effects? Because there's a difference, forgive me here for a second. There's a difference to you, Mr. Chair. There's a difference between recording the information to say X amount of cars came in, X number of work permits came in, X number of cars have been licensed. Recording the information and analyzing the information as to what the pros and cons are of this change is totally different than just recording it. I'm asking you, whose job is to analyze it and say what the SWOT analysis is? Is that the Ministry of Finance? So
I think he's answered that question, member, about 3 times. The ministry does it, sir.
Okay. Last question. I thank you, Mr. Chair, for being very patient with me. So I do appreciate that. Would it be fair to say that, like my colleague mentioned earlier, that the Ministry of Finance has a representative on all boards and authorities and government-owned companies?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. Through you. I would say, Mr. Chairman, that we certainly have that opportunity, and we are afforded that opportunity to have a representative on all boards. I wouldn't be speaking honestly if I said that, yes, we do have a sitting representative on every single board, but certainly on the major boards. And so on Cayman Airways, Health Services Authority, we don't have a rep on thanks. We don't have a rep on the SEMA board, but Port Authority board, Turtle Center board, all the major boards and authorities.
National Roads Authority?
We are afforded that opportunity, sir. Yes, just to sit on those boards. So like I said, we may not have a physical body in place for every single one because our staff is a bit, if we did that, if we staffed every single seat that we are able to do, then one person could end up sitting on 5-6 boards easy.
Well, I thank you. In closing up now, through you, Mr. Chair, you did say there you guys have been afforded the opportunity to have a rep on the National Roads Authority, and I see here on the a line item that we previously block voted on, FED2. You also have representative on the National Housing Development Committee as well. So you guys, and under the descriptions there, you give advice to these various different boards and authorities. So would it be fair to say then, based on the fact that this ministry is in charge of analyzing the information, making predictions, estimates and forecasts, that you will be able to analyze the market and also tell the relevant agencies that potentially will be affected by these changes to make the necessary moves to change them. For example, your rep could have given advice to the National Housing Development that the potential increase in the housing costs to make necessary changes, or the National Roads Authority that the increase in cars and numbers of persons that this effect would be coming. Would that be fair?
Mr. Chairman, I think in theory, yes, it would be a fair comment to make. I think in practice, being honest, I don't think that's happening in practice, that we are actually making such recommendations.
Thank you, sir. I'm ending my questions.
Member for Borden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important that the public realizes that ultimately this House, in terms of political decision, is ultimately where the responsibility is. And the information is there for all of us to use, and whichever way we think is best to represent the people. One of the things I really want to thank the ESO for is in terms of when they put together the compendium of statistics and the annual and quarterly reports, is that sometimes they use comparisons to other jurisdictions. And one of the things I would really like, I know next year may be a busy year with the census and everything else, but going forward, what I think would really add value, especially when we're looking at consumer price indexes, because we look at different metrics and we compare them to regional. If we can look at some of our basket of goods and compare them to other areas within the region, in particular South Florida, because I would really and truly like for people in this country to see exactly how much they're being ripped off with some of the prices compared to our neighbors and everywhere else, and as to why. I think that would definitely add some value in terms of why we're paying for some of the stuff that we're paying. I think that would go well with the ministry, and also allow the government to engage some of the different stakeholders in a different way. Because one of the things I have seen, and this is why I have a lot of respect for this ministry, and Mr. Jefferson, I must say you have your grasp of the knowledge of your ministry is phenomenal, and I must say it is not gone unnoticed. And one of the things that I took away from this budget process, and this is not to name any particular minister or anything like that, is to make sure that the technocrats to provide the ministry and ultimately the policy makers, which is cabinet, that information is there. And that's one of the things that we're looking for comfort from, is to make sure, because at the end of the day, whenever you have a new minister on any scene, you need to make sure that there's a seamless transition, and that is the role of the public service and the civil service to ensure that ministers are brought up to date. And we have seen in many instances here where ministers took over new portfolios and were not given that proper transition document. And so at least I'm comfortable from a finance standpoint that you guys have achieved that in terms of, from that standpoint. But just to add value is in terms of some of the data, is just to compare it to our competitors or the regional areas, and then we can better have a better idea. But outside that, Mr. Chairman, I must applaud yourself and your ministry team for the fine work that they have done. I've dealt with them throughout the years, and they're top class. And I think your results speak for themselves.
Thank you, member. Member for
Mr.
Camelback
Chair,
East.
it certainly goes without saying that the government has full confidence in you as Minister of Finance, and we chose you and gave you the responsibility. And certainly Mr. Jefferson's track record speaks for himself and the whole entire team. And on behalf of the government, we want the record to accurately reflect how very indebted and appreciated we are for all the work and hard hours and the patience that you exercise when everybody competing wide for prioritization.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that intervention. All right, well, member for East End.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wonder when was the last time the basket of goods was updated?
You people here.
$2015, Mr. Chairman.
So it goes about every 10 years then? Because I recall we did it in 2006, 2007. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just conferring with the director. Normally, the basket of goods are updated every 5 years. So 2015 plus 5 years would make it next due in 2020. But I've just been advised that because the census is also taking place in 2020 and will continue, the work from that will continue in 2021. 2021. The next update to the basket of goods is likely to be done in 2022.
All in favor of FED1, policy advice and ministerial services, $2,203,050 in 2020, $2,236,943 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Can I chance it and put FED4 to the vote? All in favor of FED4, preparation and publication of statistical and economic reports, $3,638,680 in 2020 and $2,037,818 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. CIN 1, health insurance for seamen and veterans for primary and secondary health care, $13,048,000 in 2020 and $13,688,332 in 2021. Are there any questions?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I just wonder if the member can provide us any update with regards to the conversation that was being held with the statutory authorities and government-owned companies with regards to post-retirement health care. Since the introduction of I think it's the Public Authorities Law, persons working for SAGCs are identified both in terms of pay scale and other benefits as public servants. But upon retirement, some of those public servants will only receive, I think it's 3 months of post-retirement health care as compared to the core civil servants. And I wonder if the member can provide some update as to what that situation is, and certainly if any improvements or have been made to address those concerns.
FS.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to honorable members, I think this is a difficult area for the government, the central government itself. What has been happening with the statutory authorities and the government companies is that more and more of those authorities and companies are actually recording the liability and placing the liability squarely in their primary financial statements, the balance sheet and the income statement. And they're doing so in order to avoid a qualification of their financial statements by the Auditor General's office. So increasingly, more and more authorities are recognizing the liability squarely on the face of their primary financial statements. The previous Minister for Finance, Mr. Chairman, issued a memo some years ago detailing what essentially came down to the conclusion that if at the end of a financial year an individual was an employee of a statutory authority, it was that statutory authority's responsibility and should account for the entire length of service that that employee had worked, and that liability and that expense should fall squarely on the statutory authority that the employee happened to be working with at the end of the financial year, even though that employee may have worked X number of years with central government in the past. It was getting to be quite difficult in terms of splitting up the periods of service between a central government period of service by an employee versus then a subsequent period of service for a statutory authority. So it was said mainly for administrative purposes and ease that the total period of service would fall squarely on the statutory authority that the employee worked at the end of a financial year. Mr. Chairman, and so that remains to be the case now, Mr. Chairman. I know too that there will be a rising tide, I believe, speaking in loose everyday language, there will be a rising tide by the authorities to, even though they're accepting the liability on their financial statements, there will be a rising tide of the authorities coming back to government to say, can you assist us with this liability? Central government itself, Mr. Chairman, rather than place the liability squarely on the face of its balance sheet and in the income statement, we do have frequent evaluations done as to the extent of the liability, and we place such details in notes to, or in a note to the government's financial statement detailing the extent of the liability, which is in the region of $1.6 billion or thereabouts. That detail is recorded in government's financial statements, but in the notes to the financial statements. Mr. Chairman, just to round off, I would say that at present, an employee retiring, leaving full-time employment, happen to work with a statutory authority, that employee would be faced with going forward into retirement life based on the regime at present of the authority or the government company, as opposed to necessarily getting lifetime coverage with central government. I think that's the situation now, but I think it's open for dialogue between the authorities and government. Mr. Chairman, that's as best as I can do, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the member for the response. I wonder if he can clarify to me, again, my understanding for that benefits post-retirement applies largely to staff that perhaps may be seconded to SAGCs, but not so much the current or historical staff. Likewise, I understand the resistance by SAGCs for wanting to post this liability on their books, because in some cases, some of these SAGCs are operating at break-even levels, and to record these liabilities would change the hue of those books considerably. But we have a situation whereby the introduction of a new law, the Public Authorities Law, which has therefore moved these public servants, if not forced these public servants, to comply with the civil service pay scale. And therefore, in the absence of having that post-retirement lifetime health care benefit, forcing them to comply or to accept the civil service pay scale in many respects puts these public servants at a disadvantage. Any response to that would be appreciated, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the honourable members' points and contribution are certainly understood. Certainly understood. I think it really requires a global response, a global consideration from the government as a whole, from the cabinet, from portfolio civil service. I don't think that I can provide such a response, individually from the Ministry of Finance, but I think he's articulated his view very well, and the issue is understood, and it's an important issue, Mr. Chairman, a very important issue.
Member for North Side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, is not the problem with these public authorities and statutory companies of government that their boards have chosen to get private health insurance, which offers zero retirement benefits? Although we were told here at the last Finance Committee by one authority that they had negotiated with their private provider to carry retirement benefits health insurance. When I contacted the provider, he told me, yeah, for one person out of 40, right? So the problem we have now is that the board and the employees have chosen during their working life to be insured with a private health insurer because that provides certain choice that being insured under Cynical does not allow, and certain conveniences. The problem is now that they have subscribed to these private insurances. The private insurances has made a bundle of money on them. I know of at least one public authority that shifted from Cynical to a private provider approved by the board at the increased cost of 75,000 CI per annum, right? Now that they don't have health insurance, they are going to lean back on government, and they are going to wind up in government one way or another. They are either going to wind up by the government putting in place some global coverage as the FS suggests, or they're going to wind up there through being certified as indigent because they can't get health insurance, because we do not force the inadequate, the useless health insurance legislation that we have does not force the private companies to provide that retirement benefit after they have collected all of the profit over the 40 years that the person worked. So question is the consideration being given to solve this problem is to say to all public authorities and all statutory authorities that they must subscribe to Cynical from day one for their employees.
Mr. Chairman, if you would give me a question.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. Again, the issue that the honourable member has articulated is understood. I can't say, sir, that I've heard that consideration being voiced throughout the government, throughout the public sector. I cannot say that I've heard that. Mr. Chairman, I think even perhaps more important or an even bigger issue than the member has raised is, I think the employees or the retirees would be, their primary concern is having to take monies out of their own pocket to pay for their coverage. If it were the case, their bigger concern is, can my former employer pay the entire premium and I pay zero and I get coverage? So it's you know, if they were able to get coverage, if the private insurance company offered coverage for someone who was 76 years old, even though it was $2,035 per month, that 76-year-old wouldn't be particularly bothered about that, provided their former employer paid that $2,036 per month. So it is also about the extent to which the retiree is being asked to pay. I think that is perhaps their biggest concern.
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't agree with you more. But if we don't do it this way, what you're saying to the civil servants who pay in to Cynical, that they're going to have to subsidize these quasi-civil servants who enjoy this 40 years of these good benefits going to through the private sector, they're going to have to subsidize their premium at Cynical, and that's unfair to the average civil servant, because we're already doing it for the indigent and everybody over 65 anyway, because no private health insurance that I am aware of offers a plan for a 76-year-old. But getting back to this specific vote, Mr. Chairman, is this $13 million, is this a pass-through? In other words, government is paying Cineco to pay for health care for these seamen and veterans, and it is not a health insurance premium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. The government does actually pay Cineco on a monthly basis for coverage, and at the moment, Mr. Chairman, the total number of persons covered is approximately 1,100. So that'd be 1,100 of seamen, veterans, their dependents. Would typically now that number is running at approximately 1,100 persons.
But through you, Mr. Chairman,
And
we should only have like 5-6 veterans left, because this plan is only supposed to be covering veterans who fought in World War I and World War II. Any Caymanians who fought in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraqi War, those are American wars, and they're supposed to be being taken care of by American taxpayers, not Cayman taxpayers. And we got to make sure that they're not getting it double. Because the Americans brag of how they take care of their veterans. I mean, that don't apply to them being homeless and all those sorts of things. But
Mr. Chairman, sorry, just to, at the risk of actually causing more questions for myself, I do actually have a breakdown of numbers that I could make available to the committee. What I'm noticing, Mr. Chairman, from this single sheet of paper, given numbers as at the end of November, 3rd of November 2017, November 18, and the 13th of November 19. What I do notice is that they currently, the veterans on Grand Cayman are shown in November 19 as 8, and the spouses for 4 for a total, subtotal of 12. But some of those, Mr. Chairman, some of those veterans actually pay a part of the premium themselves. So that I have as 7 veterans paying partially the monthly premium. I have the information available. I could get the page to distribute it just for members' knowledge.
Chairman, the last time we got those numbers, it was followed up by letters from the Veterans Association saying that they didn't agree with the numbers they have. Those numbers certainly sound a lot more reasonable than what we would expect it to be. But the other question is, the last Finance Committee, I made a suggestion, and I think Cineco offered to do the work, was to look at all of the demographics that government is covering under Cineco, not those to whom Cineco sells who are members of the private sector, of all of the government people covered, and to do a real actuarial calculation of the demographics and the frequency of use, the amount of use, and because we should have good statistics now, and see what the average premium would be. Because I maintain that many of these things that we're doing with all these little subheads, $1 million here, $10 million there, $20 million here, don't make a lot of sense if we're talking health insurance, because the whole premise of health insurance is that the healthy people pay a little more so that the sick people can pay a little less. Because the alternative to us getting old and getting sick ain't so good. You wouldn't need no health insurance there. The streets are lined with gold, they say. So I wonder if that exercise was done and whether we have any information on that through you, Mr. Chairman.
Just conferring, Mr. Chairman. Just state your name.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Frank Alippi, Chief Financial Officer, Seneco, at the Ministry of Health. Through you, Mr. Chair, we are currently looking at various different products through our strategic plan, but as the Honorable Member from the North stated, it would, if we look at all the government pockets of the insurance, it would bring down the premium for the elderly and increase the premium for the younger persons. However, that would mean that the civil servant's core costs would actually go up because that would be funding indigent. The core civil service will go up because it's also funding SIN 1 and SIN 2. So that's sort of a directive that the government would have to give us, the ministry would have to give us. The way we sort of determine the premium is based on the risk that is being insured, the demographic. So whereas the civil service, the average age is 44, so that premium would be slightly lower than a demographic like the seaman and veteran, or even the indigent.
But Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with the CFO, but that's the principle of health insurance. What we're doing here is we have a health insurance law, but we are subsidizing and overcharging in some instances. We're taking things out of that should be covered by the law, right? And funding it in other ways. And that has to be more expensive in the long run because the indigent's not working, the civil servants and the regular people still paying for them. We just don't know what it is and how we're doing it.
Mr. Chair, through you, at the end of the day, when you look at the government plans, there's a revenue requirement that's based on the claims. So if you just do one nominal premium rate, it's just a different way to allocate the premium amongst the various stakeholders, but the overall revenue requirement is still going to be the same unless, the core issues relating to the claims, the demographics, the living, the lifestyles and all of that is addressed. The revenue requirement will still be the same.
Member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, certainly I also want to thank the FS for his earlier answer as it relates to the challenge of providing post-retirement health care for those persons in statutory authority and government-owned companies. And I agree with him that a wider discussion on this point needs to be held beyond just the Ministry of Finance. But that being said, there are, to my count, thousands of public servants that this will impact in the very near future. And if we were to employ the recommendation made by the Honourable Member from Northside, I just want to clarify in my mind, if Cineco was to be that service provider, then to the point of the CFO moments ago, would it be true, therefore, that costs for Cineco would go up for core civil servants if we were to include statutory authority and government-owned company staff as part of their permanent lifetime health care plan?
Mr. Chair, through you, under that gamut, we would essentially charge a premium rate, so the costs wouldn't necessarily go up. Yes, they would on the expense line on its own, but at the same time, we would be receiving a premium to fund those costs. And if the premium is priced appropriately, at a break even, there shouldn't be a deficit.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think just in casual dialogue here, this course of action should be at least added to the wider discussion on this point, because again, public servant, civil servant, these are employees of the government doing work that is important to this country, who are facing retirement on the face of knowing that they may have only 3 months of post-retirement health care remaining, and certainly if they were to use their pensions, that money would dry up very quickly, and they will all be at the doorstep of ministries like the Ministry of Community Affairs, Indigent Health Care, et cetera, and these numbers are only going to increase as years go by. So I think we have at present a starting point for a wider discussion, and I thank the members through you, Mr. Chairman, for facilitating that.
To you, Mr. Chairman, to the CFO, it would be true that the millions of dollars annually that government authorities and government statutory companies that are currently paying to the private insurers would be coming into Cynical as a source of revenue, which would dilute the cost, because we got to be picking up the cost of those people over 60 anyway. But we're not getting the millions of dollars that the private sector is collecting in insurance for the 40 years that the employee is working for them.
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, that will be true.
Member for
Yeah, I just want to stay on this train of thought, Mr. Chairman, through you. And I'm happy that the member for Prospect and the member on Northside have raised this issue. My problem with this, and just to put things in context, first question, how many between civil servants and their dependencies and everybody is covered at Cynical presently? Just a ballpark number is fine.
Mr. Chair, through you, the civil servants and some of the statutory authorities that we do insure, the number of members, the employees, and the dependents, approximately 10,000.
Okay, 10,000. The question, or what I want to put in the universe, Mr. Chairman, is this. When you look at Cynical, for the 10,000 that is persons that is covering, and you look at the revenues from Cynical, from government, which next year is 2020 is 96 million, and the year after is 102 million. So in essence, we're 100 million, we're covering 10,000 people. If we look at our overall population, where everyone is required to have health insurance, which is mandatory. So if 10,000 people is costing the government 100 million, the real issue here is how is it then the remaining 50,000 people is only costing within the private sector roughly around, I want to make sure this number is in Sierra US. 1 second, I should have double checked that. My apologies, I think this is in US. I don't put the wrong number out there because that 20% difference does add up. Yeah, this actually is, I think this actually is CI, that's fine. So, in a nutshell, the 10,000 that government is insuring is running us at 100 million. But the other 50,000 that's not covered in Cynical is 250 million roughly a year is what they're paying in premium. Something in that number just does not add up. And what that goes to show is that the private sector, because I've looked at both the budgeting for government, including for work that was done by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of under the DG's office, and the amount of money budgeted is in line with previous years and consistent with previous years. So we have raised no questions in terms of the actual amount that you have budgeted. Based on historical trend, they're in line with trend, so we're fine with that. The challenge we have here, Mr. Chairman, through you, is that ultimately the purpose of insurance is to spread risk. And you can't have an entity that is doing 50,000 people or whatever is left that the Cynical isn't covering, because everything else would be private sector to some extent. There's no way that you can be insuring 10,000 people for a cost of $100 million a year, and the remaining 50, 60,000 is being for 250 million, and then 50 million profit. Now, the purpose of insurance is to spread risk, and the only thing that is happening here is that the risk is being spread to cynical. Because when people go and retire after working from 16 to 65, 49 years, and having 50 years of private sector insurance, the minute they go to retire, they have nothing at the time in their life when they need it the most. And cynical charging $300-400 to a person 65 and above does not represent the risk that that person presents, because it is way more than that. And what is happening here, Mr. Chairman, is that the civil service, what government is paying for the civil service, is also actually subsidizing the retired workers from the private sector. And this is unsustainable. We cannot maintain this in this country any longer. Now, it's either A, the government capitalizes cynical to the point to allow it to go full insurance and offer the coverage to other areas within the private sector, but it can't be a situation where government continue taking this burden, and every minute, every couple of years, we're basically injecting more capital into cynical. This is the unsustainable model. And it needs to be fixed. Now, ultimately, we're not going to get it fixed here. But what I would really like in all of this is if the cynical board can actually present to Cabinet for your consideration a plan as to what it will take for them to move to a full insurance company nationally and basically compete within the private sector. But we can no longer allow the private sector to cherry pick, because you still have employees in the private sector that when they can't get the coverage over there, they basically send them to cynical. And what is happening is that the government is taking all the high risk, they're taking all the low risk, and bear in mind, Mr. Chairman, is that the majority of people in the private sector are people on work permits. And one of the things required for a work permit is basically a good clean health record. So even then, again, the risk is even mitigated, because no one is hiring anyone that is going to drive up the insurance premiums. So this is ultimately a bigger issue that needs to be fixed, and cynical cannot become the dumping ground for what it is that the private sector wants to do. So I know the Premier himself has made it in his budget address, where he has recognized that this is an issue. And this is an issue that ultimately, like I said, we're not going to fix it here today, but it can't continue.
Mr. Chair, through you, some clarifications first. The member asked how many civil servants and dependents we cover. The number I provided was 10,000, which includes pensioners and some of the civil and some of the it does not include the seamen and veterans. So for the core government and the pensioners and some of the statutory authorities, the actual premium that we charge is about 80 million. And then we have 13 million for seamen and veteran. But if you look at that 80 million for those 10,000 members, one of the reasons why the cost or the premium is really high is it goes back to the plan. The plan is a very generous plan. It's essentially 100% with little limits. Now, if that plan was a traditional insurance plan with having co-insurance and co-pays, that premium would go down because there would be limits on the benefits.
Thank you very much. And that proves my point, because if you're saying that is $1,000, $1,300, whatever per person, why then do we believe that someone retiring to cynical can go out and basically be paying $300 and something at a time in their life when they basically need insurance the most? So these people are covered properly. The veterans and the seamen are covered properly. My issue is the non-government responsible ones, and therein lies the problem that we have with this problem. $300 a month premium doesn't cut it, and you can't have them for 50 years of their work in healthy life paying into a private sector premium, and then they end up at government door. My next question to Mr. Chairman, through you. Sorry, I know I was getting a little bit heated right there. And just expanding on the question that the member from Prospect had offered, had asked, which I think is a very good question. In terms of those statutory authorities that are booking these expenses and then recording the liabilities to satisfy the Auditor General, question, ultimately, when is that liability satisfied? When do they actually make a payment? And if so, who do they make a payment to? It's one thing to say you owe somebody money. It's one thing to say you have a liability. It's another thing when you actually paid. Is that money being paid into government, or where is that money being paid? Or is it just sitting on paper in the universe? We need to understand where it's going, because ultimately I would like for that money or a fund to be created. So ultimately when the time comes, that money is there, that expense that we recorded is actually there to satisfy it at the point when they actually need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. Certainly the monies are not being paid to government, quite the other way around. The authorities are actually looking for, I believe, because we've had requests for certain meetings, the authorities are actually, some of the authorities are actually looking for government's assistance in getting rid of that liability. So it certainly has been established on the books based on an actuarial valuation as to the extent of the liability, the value of the liability at the end of each financial year. And it sits there on the books. Obviously, as the employee goes into retirement life, they will need to obviously get health care afforded to them. And it is, at the moment, it is expected that that authority would pay for that health care. So at the moment, to answer your question, to be honest, the liability has been established there on their books, but there has been precious little movement taking place on that liability that has been established.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Member for East End.
The creation of authorities came many years ago, but with civil servants. That's how authorities were formed, with civil servants as staff. During those transitions, every one of those laws specifically said that those staff that were transferring to the authority must not be any worse off. Wages, salaries, pensions, insurance, benefits. We are talking about this now. I'm glad the member from Prospect has brought it up. We created this, you know. The members of this parliament has created it by allowing statutory authorities over the years to not recognize and follow that provision in their law. Look at every one of the laws. The staff of the statutory authorities who are not under Cynical and under the pension board should sue them, the boards. That's a fact. They allowed this to happen. Now their authorities have reached a point where many of their staff are retiring. And they have nothing. They have worked themselves to death because governments over the years have allowed them to do what they want to do. They inflate their own salaries at the top. They go out and get insurance, like Mr. Miller said, from private sector, because it gave them the opportunity, them at the top, to choose whichever doctor they want. That's what they wanted. They didn't want to go to government hospital. No, the consequences of that is that the staff who were digging the trenches, who were down in the trenches, are going to suffer. We need to get back with that liability. We need to get back to the point where they all go back under Cynical and they pay that liability off over a period of time. Do not give them any choice. They are a government company. They are a government statutory authority. I have argued this for the last 19 years about this, and nobody has done anything about it. I have had my say again, and I rest my case.
Member for Buttontown West, then I'm going to put the vote.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to understand one of the issues that came up last night from out of the pension discussion was the vesting period. I think after someone who has worked 10 years in government, their pension would have vested, and I think after a certain period of time, they can get up to a certain percentage when they go to retire. For people who have worked 10 years, is there a similar situation on the healthcare side where if you work for government for 10 years, when you do go to retire, certain benefits would have vested?
FS, are you able to answer that?
Mr. Chair, just to provide some background, as I'm familiar with the personnel matters as well.
Can I ask you if you state your name and position?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Accountant General, Treasury Department, Matthew Tippett. The law previously required the civil servant would have 10 years and they would then get post-retirement healthcare benefits. However, the law was changed in 2004, 2005 that required the civil servant both to have 10 years consecutive experience and to retire from government. So on the retirement, you get the benefit of post-retirement healthcare benefits.
Need for him to sit down. Okay.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. The reason why I asked that question is that I know there are some individuals in the private sector who have reached out to me who have the final 10 years left before retirement, where they're looking to take literally any job in government just to get the 10 years in to get that healthcare benefit. And I really think it's unfair that after spending 40 years in private sector, and I can't blame them for finding something within the system and then basically find a way around it, but I think it is unfair if a person is working 50 years and to take 10%, 10 years or 20% of their working life to roll into government in the last 10 years of their working life and then walk away with a benefit that people who have given 100% of their service to the country, that cannot be right. And I really think this is something that needs to be looked at also. So again, I would like to put that out there for you guys to look at developing some policy and present something to Cabinet where they can actually make a decision to deal with this issue. But it's not right.
Your point is taken, sir. I'm just, in my own mind, thinking, is finance the right place for it, or should it be within the POCs? Or
Actually, no, finance is the right place for it because this is a liability and money to the country.
I understand that. I understand by dealing with employment matters. Member for Northside.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if the FS or the CFO from Seneca would agree, but there is an alternative fix. You don't need to amend the the health insurance law to say that no person's coverage can be cancelled as long as their premium is paid and provide a 30-day grace period. That would prevent the private sectors from simply refusing to cover somebody once they get 60. They would have to cover them into retirement then, sir. And we already have protections in the health insurance law that the Health Insurance Commission has to approve any increase in a person's premium.
All in favor of CIN 1 health insurance for seamen and veterans for primary and secondary health care, $13,048,000 in 2020 and $13,688,332 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Colleagues, we have one last one to go through, and that is EI 4. EI4, Cayman Islands Development Bank, $4,500,000 in 2020 and 2021. Do we have questions? Member for Bodentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hopefully this item shouldn't be too long. One of the things that has been on my mind, especially now with the literally barring the credit union, literally no other Cayman Islands banking entity exists. And in terms of the development bank, is there any long-term plans by the government to capitalize the development bank to where it can basically to expand its products and services?
Mr. Chair, while you're waiting for that, perhaps if I could beg your indulgence and ask the Sergeant to present this to the Leader of Opposition, as I promised to do yesterday, which is the application for commercial and non-commercial farmer.
Mr. Chairman, he don't need to do it. I did it last night. I won't just put it in the garbage can. I did it last night. And I told her that I could handle myself.
So,
Member, over the last 5 to 6 years, the government has been slowly recapitalizing the CIDB and actually funding the debt obligations as they come due for repayment. And that really is where we are with regard to it. I mean, the equity in the CIDB continues to grow each year, and I am aware that they have a strategic plan which would include some lending to be able to implement lending programs once again. So they have for many years. Were not able to do so because of the very poor financial state, but we have been funding equity injections each year to allow to recapitalize.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess through you to you. The next question then, in terms of, because I know we have been recapitalizing it for it to remain compliant with some of the requirements from SEMA. But what I'm looking for is ultimately what will the big picture look like, or where does the government envision taking the Cayman Islands Development Bank over the next 5 to 10 years? Is it just going to continue on this path, or is it a situation where we're looking to basically, and I would quickly support a $50 or $100 million capitalization and going properly into the market, but I was just trying to understand where the government thought process is with this particular entity and what does the future look like. Thank you.
Remember, I think government's position, they would like to see it get back to what it was initially set up to do, and that is to be looking to help develop small business and agriculture and other areas to support the local economy. That is where I think we would like to see it get back to its roots, and for the reasons why it was created in the very first place. All in favor of EI4, Cayman Islands Development Bank, $4,500,000 in 2020 and $4,500,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Colleagues, this seems a very convenient place for us to take the break for lunch. We have two votes, two areas for the off-reg vote that we need to come back after lunch and complete. So we'll take it is 10 minutes to 1. Let's come back at 2 o'clock and we'll complete that. And before we go, I just want to thank my team, particularly the Financial Secretary and everyone else from the Ministry, Cineco and CIDB for being here and being prepared to answer questions. Thank you all.
Very inefficient facility. If you talk to the cargo operators today, they're under a significant amount of stress. It's simply not an efficient process, and it has to double up for cruise guests at the same time. And so by expanding the cargo facility, it really does guarantee a much more efficient movement of cargo through the port, as well as separating cargo from cruise, which seems to be a very logical step forward. There will be employment opportunities, obviously, that will come with the project. This is a very extensive infrastructure project. It is going to take 2 weeks, two weeks, I wish. It's, it's going to take 2 years to build. There will be, obviously, there's a local company who's overseeing the project. There will be significant employment opportunities associated with the construction of this infrastructure, and those construction jobs will last easily beyond 2 years, because this project obviously is a 2-year project. There'll be plenty of work that continues after that. More importantly, the increase in volume of tourists that will come to Cayman will guarantee a significant increase in the number of tourism jobs associated with the increase in tourists coming into the island. And there will be multiple entrepreneurial opportunities to create experiences for these guests and customers who are coming into Cayman. I think that it was previously mentioned, and it's really an important element of this project, which I think was a surprise actually to me in a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago when I was here. I was told with great certainty that the peak tourism business for the cruise business is in the winter. And when I told the person that that was actually completely incorrect, that our peak is the summer, it's not the winter, they were very surprised to learn that, because Cayman's peak is in the winter. The cruise tourism peak is all the way through the summer, from late April, early May, all the way through to October. That is really the peak for the cruise industry. And of course, that is remarkably complementary with the peak winter in Cayman. And currently, the bigger ships, certainly from Royal Caribbean, are not able to call into Cayman, and they operate all the way through the summer. All of our big, large Oasis-class ships that have significantly more affluent customers cannot call in Cayman. And they are all in the Caribbean all through the summer, with some of our most high-value, high-yielding guests in the entire industry. They just sail by Cayman. So the projection is that the volume of cruise tourists will grow from 1.9 million to 2.5 million. And again, as previously pointed out, I think the peak today is somewhere between 20 and 25,000 cruise tourists a day. That is the peak that occurs during the winter. As you move through the summer months, there's plenty of days where that number is significantly lower. The intention is to bring more capacity in through the summer, and therefore there will be more days with volumes closer to that peak of 20, 25,000, but during the summer months, which we believe is a significant positive for the tourism economy here on the island, because you will be receiving many, many more customers during a low season period historically for you. And more interestingly, the customers that we will bring will be our most affluent customers on our larger Oasis class ships. The visitor traffic flow will be significantly improved. Today, all of these cruise ships come into Georgetown. The ships have to position themselves. It's highly dependent upon perfect weather. If the weather condition is not perfect, which as we all know happens fairly frequently, if the sea condition is not perfect, if the wind condition isn't perfect, the ships can take longer to position themselves. They will not start tender operations when there is any kind of inclement weather. Many of these cruise ships, our cruise ships and our competitors' cruise ships, carry families with children. There's a lot of older guests, and it's not a particularly pleasant experience debarking these big ships on these tenders today. The guys who operate the tenders today do a remarkable job. I'm not criticizing those teams. They do a phenomenal job. But the fact of the matter is that these huge ships that are coming in today have families and older people. They have to climb down gangways. They have to climb onto these tenders. If the sea is moving in any possible way, the boats are moving, the ship is moving, it's not the most optimal process. And it can take hours to debark a cruise ship today, which again is not particularly efficient and is one of the key drivers of congestion in the cruise port today when all of these ships are trying to operate at the same time. This will allow us, literally like an airport, to manage the arrivals of the ship just as it is today in the airport. A plane arrives, it debarks, another plane arrives, another plane arrives, etc. We will be able to operate in a very similar fashion with the cruise ships. A cruise ship comes in, it starts debarkation, the next cruise ship comes in, it starts debarkation. It'll even out the flow of guests through into the transportation hub, and we can move them out very quickly. So we think it's going to be a significantly improved and far more efficient process. It also gets people ashore into the experiences with more time, because today, as it takes a couple of hours to debark any one of these ships, it also takes a couple of hours to embark one of these ships. And I'm sure you've seen it on many occasions, long lines of cruise guests standing, waiting for their tenders to take them back to the ships. That's time, time is money, and those guests could be ashore spending their money with you. We think there'll be significant opportunity for the development of more tour destination experiences. We've seen this, of course, in other destinations around the world. It's an entrepreneurial opportunity. We know our guests today are seeking experiences. We've seen a fairly significant change in how our guests view their experiences and their travel and their vacation experiences. We know there's a shift in terms of how people are spending their money. They're moving away from buying TV sets. They're more interested in purchasing experiences. Our company is growing and continues to grow because we're very focused on delivering phenomenal vacation experiences to our guests, and the demand continues to increase. And it's amazing how much people are willing to pay for the right kind of experiences. So we think there's significant opportunity here to really deliver these types of experiences in a different way to our cruise tourists, which, by the way, generates significantly higher spend. And we see that in many destinations around the world. The other consideration is that the port project will be integrated into the Georgetown Master Plan, which we think would be another enhancement in terms of removing congestion and improving traffic flow in the Georgetown area. I mentioned this a couple of times. For Royal Caribbean, our larger Oasis class ships, our newer, larger ships, have significantly more affluent guests sailing on them. Their affluence is around 20% higher. They literally spend a lot more money. And those guests and those customers today are sailing right past Grand Cayman. And the opportunity exists to bring those guests on Oasis-class ships into Cayman all the way through the summer. The economic impact today is estimated at around $240 million to the Cayman economy. After the project is finished, with the increase in number of cruise tourists coming to the island, our estimation is that will improve by $100 million a year, which of course is quite significant, and that'll all come into the economy. We certainly understand that after the referendum, whatever the decision may be, obviously we're hoping the decision is to move ahead with the project. As a consortium, we have invested millions of dollars into the project to date, and we've hired a lot of experts, and we put a lot of energy into creating what we think is a very viable, efficient, positive plan. But there's many steps that follow, and I think the point I'm trying to make is that we understand that the referendum is either a yes or no to proceed with the project. It's important to understand that the yes on the referendum, as we understand it, is the beginnings of a process. And that process is like any other process associated with a construction project. There is much work that has to be done, many permits and approvals, oversight that has to be received in terms of executing the project. But we're very ready to continue on that journey once we know what the decision is. We really think this is a win-win partnership. Both cruise companies have been coming to Cayman for over 50 years. We've been bringing our guests here. They've had a wonderful time. We genuinely think it's time to change the model, and we think it's an exciting opportunity, and we're very hopeful that this will pass. We're committed to environmentally responsible practices. Each cruise company has over 80,000 employees each with families and children. We're all concerned about the environment. We all want to make sure that any impact is completely minimalized, and we're very committed to make sure that that happens. It's positive from the perspective of employment. This will create more jobs on an ongoing basis in the tourism sector, and of course associated with the project itself. And there's many entrepreneurial opportunities that come with this. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I think now we're going to open it up for questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
I've been at the port from 1995. All these vessels keep on getting bigger. We are having more and more actually containers coming in. If you look at the figures from back in 2010, we actually had about 22,000 TEUs coming in, and at the end of actually 2018, we were up at actually 30,000. So this is a fairly large increase in only 8 years. So if we continue with that same actually trend, another 8 years, we're going to be 35-37% more, and we just do not have that space as it is now for us to keep on doing this. We cannot move all the containers that come in off of a vessel from the dock up to the cargo center within a single night. All of the actually increased volume, it is just not making it possible anymore.
I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Dwayne Seymour, MLA Minister for Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing. Now that you've seen the presentation and the cruise port, we will open it up to the questions, which I have. And for those who may have joined us after the housekeeping, just to repeat that there will not be a roaming mic. We would like for persons who, once you were entered, you may have been given a booklet along with a flyer and a sheet of paper. We'd like you to ask your questions on those papers for filtering process so that we can get as much as these questions answered and posed tonight. We have Ms. Bev to my right who will be sorting them so that we don't duplicate some of the questions. Your answers may have been answered based on those videos and the presentations already, but you know what? For transparent, we have to read them. So we ask you to please be respectful, be kind, so that we can get through as much of these questions as possible. I will go straight into the questions, which is in no particular order. Michael, from a cruise line perspective, what will happen if we do not build the pier? Will the big ships come to Cayman as reported?
The big ships, the order book for ships today, around 40-something% of all of the ships being constructed for the future in the cruise industry are basically these super large ships like Oasis class. We can't bring Oasis class to Cayman today, and they're the ships with the more affluent customers on them. We have 3 more Oasis class ships that will be constructed, and we have a new class of ship called Icon class, which will be a very large ship as well. None of those ships can come to Cayman. So I think what will happen is there will be no forward momentum. You know, other destinations will be moving forward and developing infrastructure and destination experiences and receiving these more affluent customers, and that's a choice that they've made. If the decision is not to proceed, then basically there will be no growth. And we certainly won't be able to bring these larger ships in the summer, which I think is a huge opportunity for Cayman. It doesn't add to the volume or congestion, it simply brings very affluent customers who are interested in coming here in your low season and our high season. And I think that's the opportunity that's going to be missed.
Okay. How many jobs will be lost by not tendering?
We did have we had a meeting with the guys who operate the tenders. Tendering will continue, so it won't be completely eliminated. It will continue. We had a discussion with them, obviously pending what the outcome of the referendum is. Both cruise companies have many other destinations around the world that do require tenders for our smaller ships and small volume destinations. And there's also opportunities to convert their existing business into other types of tourist activities associated with the tender boats that they have, and also the maritime staff that work with them. So we'd work with the tender company to try to have, you know, what we would call a soft landing, to make sure that anyone's jobs with that company were as best as possible protected, and we'd work with them to move them into other roles and jobs in associated parts of the business.
Thank you. To Verdant Isle. Could you enlighten us to how Verdant Isle fits into the Cayman port conversation at this stage? Could you enlighten us to how Verdant Isle fits into the Cayman port conversation at this stage?
Well, we're a consortium. It's Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Orion, and McAlpine. 4 companies have come together. We were part of a bidding process. There was a tender put out by the government, and multiple groups stepped forward and proposed the project. And this group was the group that was awarded was the preferred bidder, and that's kind of our role in this. And we're of course just now waiting to hopefully get a green light, or not.
Now, once the questions are asked, there may be some experts in the front, or even our officials here that may want to weigh in on the response. So I will not necessarily point anyone out. I will just pose the question, and those persons who are equipped and able to answer it, I'll just pass you the mic if you're in the front. Okay? Will the ships remain in port longer than 2 p.m.? Will the ships remain in port longer than 2 p.m.?
Yes. Being able to have a ship alongside allows us to stay longer. I mean, one of the things that people become more anxious, just our tourists, our guests become more anxious when they've got to go through a tender operation. They tend to come back to the ships earlier, and they just want to come back to the ships earlier. If your ship is tied up alongside, in many ports we go to, we stay until 10 o'clock at night, we stay overnight. Of course, it's dependent upon the attractions and activities that we can offer. If there's something great happening downtown and we know about it, we'll keep our ships here until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And that's pretty normal in many destinations and ports around the world. I mean, our job as cruise companies, our entire focus is delivering great vacations. We put a huge amount of energy into making our guests super happy, and that's why they come and sail with us time and time again. We can only do that if we deliver a great vacation. And a great vacation is a huge component of a great vacation is a great destination. And they rank all of these destination experiences, and when they have a great experience ashore, they want to keep coming back, and we'll stay longer.
What guarantee do we have that Verdant Isle, with your track record, that anything you say to us about our proposed port project is reliable?
Oh, that's a little unfair. Well, well, both Royal Caribbean and Carnival Corporation have both public companies. They both trade on the New York Stock Exchange. We've both been in business for over 50 years. We are reputable corporations that are very well funded and financed. Both companies are leaders in the space, and we have engaged in projects all over planet Earth in all kinds of different circumstances, and I would say that 99.9% of those projects have always been delivered in the right way.
On those days when less than 4 cruise ships are in port, how will it be decided which 4 will disembark via berthing and which will be tendered? Would Carnival and Royal Caribbean have priority over other lines, example, MSC? On those days when less than 4 cruise ships are in port, how will it be decided which 4 will be disembarked via berthing and which will be tendered? Will Carnival and Royal Caribbean have priority over other lines? Example, MSC.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. You can all hear me? Okay. So what the government has already agreed with 4 of the 5 major lines, being Royal Caribbean, Cruise Line, Carnival Corporation, MSC, and Disney, is actual preferred preferential berthing slots. So there's 2 pairs, 4 berths, 7 days a week, and 4 7s is 28, and we've actually allotted those slots to those 4 cruise lines. So there's not going to be a question on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, who already has a slot.
I hope that answers the question. What is the anticipated increase in taxi licenses? What is the anticipated increase in taxi licenses?
We've tried to monitor the taxi and tour operators based on the growth of the industry itself. And if you look back over the number of years, you will see that in a systematic way, the increase in both tour operators and taxi operators has been along the lines of the growth in stayover and the growth in cruise passenger. So if you have 20% growth, you look at what number of taxis and tours is needed, and then you also look at the time when they're needed.
In light of a successful petition process, example, 25% of the electorate, as well as the confirmed verification process, plus the overriding negative views being expressed on social media, why do you believe so many Caymanians do not share your enthusiasm and support for the proposed cruise berthing facility?
I'll take that one. I don't know that is the case. But what I do know is there is a referendum date set for the 19th of December when all the mystery will disappear and we'll know for sure who supported it and who didn't.
Can the government guarantee that cruise liners will not be allowed to offload their own bicycles, electric bikes, and other vehicles, buses, vessels for mass transportation, which may threaten the livelihood of Caymanians offering bicycles, Segway tours, other vehicle tours, and that of taxi drivers?
The simple answer to that is that government has laws in place of what can be brought in, what can be taken out, what the duties are. But I want to make it clear that there are times when the government also has to action enforcement to make sure things aren't brought in, and it's reviewed by government on a daily basis.
What does Cayman look like if we don't build the piers and cargo port?
Well, let me start with cargo. If you don't increase the capability of bringing cargo into Cayman and into the Cayman Islands, because we hub the sister islands out of Georgetown, you're going to find an increased cost of living because it's going to be more expensive. It has been explained that we don't have the area now to actually store the containers, the TEUs, as they come off, which means you can't do it efficiently. So when you can't do something efficiently, it starts costing you more and more money. If you look on a daily basis in the harbor itself, you'll see some of the tugs that bring in the barges and some of the ships that bring in aggregate have to go back into the stream, wait there, come into demurrage, cost more money, and obviously they're going to charge more money, and that means the goods go up. The other part of it is that the revenue stream from the cruise arrivals goes toward paying for the cargo facility. And that is an identified revenue stream that is not incumbent upon any government funds right now to be used to fund that. So if cargo was to be done without a revenue stream from cruise arrivals, the government has to find the money. The government would have to take the money from education, it would have to take the money from health, it would have to take the money from social service, it would have to take the money from infrastructure, and Cayman would be a different place for that reason. The idea of tourism being one pillar of our economy is huge to keep Cayman the way it is today. If you don't strengthen your product, if you don't grow your business, you don't give opportunity to the next generation, you don't provide them the skill sets they need to be successful, and you don't allow your country to grow.
I'll just remind each of you, because we have a number of questions to get through, that those of you who've been here very early, there are refreshments to the back of the room. On to our next question. As per the Cayman Islands Government 2018 Public Finance Report, 5,000 students were given free education, 14 million given college scholarships. Cayman has had the lowest unemployment over a decade. Import duty waiver on electric cars, all achieved without cruise berthing. How are we going to make up for the shortfall when cruise shippers stop paying us for 25 years? And how is this going to affect our standard of living? How are we going to make up for the shortfall when cruise shippers stop paying us for 25 years? And how is that going to affect our standard of living?
I think it's a mathematical equation is what's being driven at. We do 1.8 million cruise passengers now. Part of the financial arrangement is that the government would receive $2 less from the passenger tax, because that would be used to pay for the cruise berthing facility. But if you do the math on it and you grow the business to 2.5 million, you'll realize that you're actually collecting more money than you are now. And the choice is, you're not going to grow your business without a cruise berthing facility. So if you want to increase your revenue, have the money available for social services, health, education, and infrastructure, you have to improve the product that you have. Anybody that's in business in this room looks at where your revenue comes from. You sit down in your meetings and you say, how do we grow revenue? The way the country grows revenue is by providing the ability for the tourism product itself to grow.
How will the spots jetty be used? 1, during construction. 2, when project is completed. How will the spots jetty be used? 1, during construction. 2, when project is completed.
The Spots Jetty will continue to serve as an alternate when the weather from the north doesn't allow you to come into Georgetown to berth.
Ain't Verdant Isle supposed to be neutral? Question. Ain't Verdant Isle supposed to be neutral?
Actually, no. Verdant Isle has been chosen by the Government Procurement Committee as the preferred bidder. As I explained at the start, this is a design, build, finance, maintain project. Until we chose a preferred bidder, we were unable to answer most of these questions because they were contingent, answers were contingent upon us having a design, having proper costings, the full range of issues. So now that we are in a position where we have a preferred bidder, I think we should welcome the fact that we have those who are invested, in every sense of that word, in the project, able to be held accountable and to answer whatever questions there are.
Will the construction of the cruise port affect the West Bay Beach?
Yeah. Scott, can you?
It's on.
Thanks.
It's yeah. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Scott Hicks. I'm with Schneider Engineering. I'm a coastal engineer. Schneider Engineering is leading the marine design components for the project. The question is regarding West Bay Beach, 7 Mile Beach, and will the construction affect 7 Mile Beach and West Bay Beach? This is addressed a bit in the presentation. Essentially, the answer is no. The dredging at the port, well, the 7 Mile Beach is a pocket beach, and so the sediment on 7 Mile Beach is relatively contained within the headlands on both the north and south side of the beach. And there's no real sediment connection between the area of the port and 7 Mile Beach. What happens is sand comes from the east end of the island. The predominant wind direction is generally from the east, and the sand moves along both the north and south ends of the island. And when it gets to the west end, on the north side, it generally tends to go offshore with a little bit of sneaking around during northwester events. So that provides a little bit of sand source, but not much. On the south side of the island, the sand gets pushed along the south side and then ends up at the southwest corner out offshore and does not make that corner around and does not transit up the west side of the island towards 7 Mile Beach. And that's based on the 2015 EIA analysis and has been backed up by other studies as well.
And for the sake of the audience, when some of these answers are actually given, there are slides here, and a lot of this information is also provided in the book for you to actually take with you. Yeah.
I guess I just talked right through that.
It's relatable. What guarantee we have that the coral reefs would not be damaged, and are we willing to trade off the natural resources and millions of revenue diving has brought to these islands for a dock? What guarantee we have that the coral reefs will not be damaged?
Dr. Vaughan, could you answer that, please?
Well, there's no guarantee that there won't be any coral damage. We are damaging corals right now by allowing these large vessels to be anchoring just offshore. We've got to stop forcing large vessels to be dropping anchors in the second reef out. We really need to have a fixed reef, like in many other places where these vessels can tie up. We need to allow that reef to actually regrow. And there will be a displacement of the inshore reef that's in the area of dredging, as well as the area of the expansion of the port and the cruise dock itself. That has been modified so it is less than what the 2015 report was forecasting. The donor site will be moved to a relocation site, as you see in the picture, just about a kilometer away, the middle one. So this will be the site of the donor. It's about 10 acres that have corals. About half of that is some very nice looking spur and grue area, and about a little less than 5 is what we call a hard bottom with occasional corals. They will be, through the coral translocation process, moved to over here with Poseidon, who did work here and came on and got a good 86% survival. There's another secondary relocation site here, but if the referendum goes, we will actually be looking at a couple of the sites to recommend possibly in the areas that they no longer will be anchoring at as an area for also being able to restore. Coral restoration will be done on top of the requirement and the suggestion of coral translocation. So the original one was basically to relocate corals. It was added onto that with this new technology that we now can do with some of the massive corals of actually restoring and growing more each year for the next 25 years. So in addition, there will be more corals put out in the areas, maybe not only in this location, but wherever in the next 25 years the Department of the Environment decides are good locations. So the bottom line is that there are some corals that are going to be impacted. The wonderful thing is that this group has looked to minimize that impact to the most possible. Everything has an impact. By me standing here and exhaling, I'm giving out some carbon dioxide, and mankind will be impacting corals around the world from my exhale. I actually was surprised on how many vehicles it took to get here today to this meeting, and each of those vehicles are putting some sort of carbon impact out there as well. So everything on this planet has an impact. You have to decide on your referendum, do you want to try and take one area and stop the damage of offshore anchors and lessen it, and maybe move corals in a relocation study, and also do a restoration study that will last many years.
In the event of a major storm or Cat 5 hurricane, will the concrete pilings hold and not uproot and wash ashore and causing major destruction to life and buildings?
Hello, everybody. My name is Barry Loudermilk with Orion Marine Group. So through all the engineering and the studies that we're doing, the pile capacity will be further reviewed once we start doing the geotechnical data. When we go out and actually do the geotech, when we take the locations of the piers and we actually drill down and we understand what the rock structure is. So a lot of the engineering that these fine guys at Snyder do is the upload or the uplift capacity of the piers. So currently these piers are designed for Cat 5 rating. So hopefully that answers your question.
Why is Cayman pursuing this direction now when so many other destinations are doing the opposite? Example, capping or reducing cruise tourism. Why is Cayman pursuing this direction now when so many other destinations are doing the opposite, i.e., capping or reducing cruise tourism?
I think if you look at the growth of cruise tourism, it's continuing, and there are many, many destinations around the world that are engaged in thoughtful master planning that is allowing that growth to continue. There are a small number of destinations, for example, a classic would be Venice, that is caught in a long debate about tourism. Not only cruise tourism, but air tourism and tourism overall. It's not just focused on cruise. This is an issue that many destinations around the world are wrestling with. Venice is a classic example. How do you manage the volume of tourists coming into basically a medieval village? And it's an ongoing debate. And we see that frequently. I mean, when we're engaged in these discussions with different communities and destinations, we're talking about thoughtful master planning and designing for the future. I think I mentioned in a previous meeting we had here that we just finished a significant investment in the Bahamas, where next year we will take 2.4 million cruise tourists to that destination every single day. We have ships calling at that destination. We'll take 2.4 million tourists to that destination, and we're only utilizing 50 acres of land. And it is currently rated the #1 destination globally for Royal Caribbean out of over 300 destinations. So this is about planning and designing for the future and figuring out how to accommodate the inevitable growth that is coming with tourism. it's not just cruise tourism, it's tourism. And by the way, Chinese outbound tourism, which is not really impacting the Caribbean in any material way at the moment, is probably coming. And today, that is the largest outbound travel market on the planet, and it is growing at an incredible rate. So tourism, you know, is part of all of our lives, and I think it's not going away. The question is, how do communities plan and prepare to manage tourism in the most efficient, effective, productive way so that it creates a win-win outcome, not only for the tourist, but for the community as well?
I think,
just to follow up on that, I think we've looked at it as a government as an opportunity to grow the business itself in a way that is conducive for the country, balancing between the environment, balancing between the jobs, balancing into the next generation. So number one, you want the highest spending passenger, which Michael Bailey has explained tonight comes on their vessels during the summer with the highest yield. You wanted to not put any more pressure on the attractions and the island itself as you have it here, so you don't allow any more people. You have a max number that we control ourselves that you're setting down, and then you push to flatten out the seasonality of it, that everybody that's in the industry knows they're going to have an income 12 months out of the year. So that's what the government has tried to do to manage the opportunity and take advantage of what is available here. If you were in Colorado, you would look at skiing. You know, we're in the Caribbean. This is an opportunity for tourism and balancing our tourism between stayover and cruise.
If I might just add, I have listened to the discussions about this for a long time now, and there is an unfortunate tendency to believe, for some people to believe, that we can do without cruise tourism. The reality of the Cayman construct is this: the vast majority of the 4,500 plus people involved in the cruise industry are Caymanian. Stayover tourism, the number is way down. Maybe 30–40% are actually Caymanians who are doing the jobs. We have tried, my government, the two that I've led, and those before me, to persuade Caymanians that they should see stayover tourism, the hospitality industry, as a viable occupation. I think we're making some strides, but we're a long way from getting the kind of Caymanian take-up that we want. I've also been around as a representative long enough to have lived through 2 cycles when cruise visitors fell down around 1.3 million and was faced with delegation after delegation of tour operators, taxi drivers, and others screaming because they couldn't pay their mortgages, they can't pay for their vehicles because they're simply not earning enough. It took us from 2000, we were at 1.8 million in 2003 before Hurricane Ivan struck. And it's taken us almost all those years to get back to 1.8 million, which is where we're at now. Now, every place has a carrying capacity. None of us are suggesting that we can go on growing this exponentially, given the finite size of Cayman and the resources that we have and the attractions we have. What we are saying is, if we have the cruise berthing facilities in place, we can avoid these maximum peaks of 25,000 people when the island is creaking because it's under so much strain, and have the 2.2 or 2.3 million people, visitors, spread across every month of the year, so that the numbers at any given time are significantly below the carrying capacity. That's what we're trying to do.
Premier, don't turn off your mic. This is a follow-up question. Can the Premier clarify or correct his statement that we will know who supported it and who didn't, bracket, after referendum?
I mean, we'll know whether it was the yes group that supported it or the no group.
For one reason, okay, hold on. I'm trying to decipher the writing here. If for any reason things go bad with the contract before the job is completed, who will be responsible for the expenses? Or who will be stuck with the expenses?
Well, the lawyer in me would say that that would be the one that is in breach of contract. So if it's gone wrong because the Cayman Islands government didn't do what they were supposed to do or did something they weren't supposed to do, then the government would have to pay out damages. If the contractor failed to deliver, then the contractor is liable.
How will the birthing benefit our own men and women and citizens of this island? Senior citizens, sorry.
Well, I think those who listened to my presentation on the budget on Friday and listened to the budget address delivered by the Honorable Minister of Finance would appreciate the concern that this government has in ensuring that the older persons in this community are able to benefit from Cayman's overall prosperity. And I'm sure people would not welcome me rehearsing all that I said on Friday, but we did announce the introduction of significant new measures to make life more affordable, more comfortable for the seniors among us. An increase in the overall revenue of the Cayman Islands government gives us that ability and will continue to give us the ability to look after the most vulnerable in our community. That's what this is about.
Will there be employment for Caymanians to work on board any of these ships, such as when our Caymanians went to sea with the national bulk carriers on any of the ships? Will there be any job opportunities?
We, for Royal Caribbean, every single year we're bringing new ships into our company. And our bigger ships, we have around 2,500 employees on each ship. We're hiring around 10,000 new employees a year for Royal Caribbean. I would imagine at Carnival it's a bigger number. We're constantly seeking people to work on our ships. And interestingly, we offer huge career opportunities. And I can actually say that about myself because 38 years ago, I started working with Royal Caribbean as a kid in an entry-level position on board a Royal Caribbean ship. And over the 38 years, I've now become the president and CEO of this company. And we hire huge numbers of young people from around the Caribbean and around the world to work with us. We would be delighted to present opportunities to people in Cayman to come and work on Royal Caribbean. More than happy to do that. And I think more recently we've started to schedule recruitment fairs, I believe, to do just that. And by the way, I would encourage, especially youngsters, once they've reached 21 plus, it's truly a great opportunity, and they get to see the world. It's an amazing opportunity.
Question as it reads, why do they need to remove the Balboa and the Cali? Why do they need to remove the Balboa and the Cali?
The Balboa sits in the sort of the center of our current dredge pocket. The Cali does not. The Cali sits to the north edge of the existing tender pier and what are a proposed edge of the tender pier. So we're not planning on moving the Cali. I know I've talked to some folks before the meeting about some issues they had, and I want to expand on those issues with you guys and talk about it with our engineers. But the Balboa, we will move it. We're going to team with an archaeology company that's going to come in and map that ship, and we're going to move those piece by piece, an exact replication of what's there today.
Just to add on that too, with the Balboa, the hope is right now it's in a very inaccessible location right outside the port and not a safe dive area, at least during the day. And it's hoped that when we relocate it to the relocation area just up to the north, that it'll be more accessible for dives and that people will be able to get out there and see it more than they can now.
How will the government manage the extra overflow of traffic congestion in the Georgetown area along with the 7 Mile Beach?
Well, we have the infrastructure minister here, and I'm tempted to ask him to take this question. But if more detail is required, I'll have to ask him to weigh in. But more broadly, we have been working for now six years on the Georgetown revitalization plan or project. A big component of that has been the design and construction of a number of new thoroughfares in and around the perimeter of Georgetown City, if I may call it that. And there is more of that kind of work planned and on the way. We've had to sort of shift some focus now to try to deal with the situation with the traffic to windward. And that really is where we're focusing. But we are very, very conscious that we have to be able to move those who come ashore as cruise visitors quickly and efficiently around. Otherwise, we defeat the overall exercise. So none of this is being done in isolation. There is a lot of thought and work going on. This project, assuming it gets the go-ahead in December, would probably not begin before the summer in any event. And so we're looking at a two and a half year construction period. So we do have that window to ensure that we get the road network up to scratch to be able to deal with the expected increase in visitors. The minister is anxious. I must have said something wrong.
Thank you. Good evening. Not a bad effort, Premier. The effort, there's two things, or a few things. From the initial get-go with the Baird report, a traffic study was done and they worked along with the NRA from then. But one of the key features of the enhanced facility is that it was mentioned earlier, is that we take all of that traffic congestion that's on Harbor Drive at the moment that's creating the slowdown entering into town, and we move that into the gates. And so you don't have all of the taxis and buses dropping off on Harbor Drive, queuing up on Harbor Drive, persons soliciting business on Harbor Drive. We move that all inside the port, which will allow free access. And the Premier touched on all of the different road networks that we're creating. But even further than that, certainly the ministry and myself, our views are in this government is that we need to look at traffic as a matter of moving people and not how do we reduce the time spent in your car. So moving people means that through the Georgetown revitalization and with the upcoming traffic study that the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport and Commerce and Planning are doing, is we're looking at things like hop-on, hop-off services around Georgetown and along the West Bay Road. so that we start mass public transportation, making it easier for people to move from A to B without having to get in their own cars. And we hope that both locals and our cruise passengers or visitors will take advantage of these sorts of opportunities.
Should we become like other destinations in the region, can't we come up with other tourism ideas to generate revenue? Should we become like every other destination in the region, can't we come up with other tourism ideas to generate revenue?
I think in the core structure of a tourism product, you have to have the driver. And the driver, in our case, is stayover and cruise. What is incumbent upon us is to take advantage of once you attract the people here to spend the money. I mean, I hate to say it in this way, but things go forward because you have funding for them to go forward. And you have a responsibility to attract income, and then that income flows into opportunity of different attractions, opportunity for different businesses, and from a government standpoint, it gives you opportunity because you have revenue streams that helps the community, helps the people.
What jobs will government assist those persons with who will no longer tender the cruise visitors?
I think Michael Bailey said a couple things in his presentation and answering some questions. Number one was that he had met with the owners, the people that work on the tenders, and looked at, as he said, a soft landing or an exit strategy. The other thing is this country has 3% unemployment. The tender operators are extremely qualified, efficient people who have an honorable income and an honorable job. I think the opportunity there, if they choose not to stay in the tender business itself, is for them to look at other types of jobs because they have skill sets that will allow them to do a lot of other things.
I'm trying to get those questions that came in at first and also trying to read while we're answering, so I'm not sorting them. I'm just trying to answer all the questions that came in so we cover as much ground as possible. Why is the cruise companies requiring Cayman to build a cruise berthing facility?
The cruise companies are not requiring Cayman to build a cruise berthing facility. This is a partnership of opportunity. We as a government, as Premier has said, for a long period of time, have looked at how we can take advantage of our tourism product and how we take advantage of revenue streams. I would say this to you, that a cruise berthing facility is similar to an airport. I had heard for 20 years that we needed a new airport built. The new airport's built. I've heard for 20 years that we need cruise berthing for Cayman to continue to move forward and create opportunity. This is our opportunity. We are doing everything that we possibly can to make it a success story in a partnership with best in class.
Will the public be able to enter the port and enjoy those shops and facilities, or will we be blocked out like we are now? Will the public be able to enter the port and enjoy those shops and facilities, or will we be blocked out like we are now?
Thank you for the question. So the security arrangements that are in place now will remain once the facility is built, if it is built.
Will there be a new independent environmental impact study carried out before the project is executed? Please introduce yourself. It's your first time speaking.
Hello, Chris Adnett from Royal Haskoning DHV. We've been doing some environmental work for the Cayman Islands government. So at the moment, the consortium are undertaking a scoping study which is looking at whether there are any significant differences in the impacts that were assessed in the original environmental statement with the new design. So that's ongoing at the moment, and the results of that will be available or will be reviewed in terms of whether an environmental assessment update is required.